Okay, so we are back.
We are back.
What spoilers? You may have noticed, if you're listening to us in a updated fashion, you may have noticed we didn't publish an episode last week because we had a minor technical snafu in which critical audio was missing from our recording. So, no recording last week.
Long story, don't change your setup to record a video podcast and forget to change it back before you record a audio podcast. Yeah, as an artifact of our show coverage that just bit us in the ass. But we are back to redo that chapter that we were supposed to do last week, chapter 17, Out on the Ice, and then also do chapter 18, which is A Peculiar Calling, all in one session with our guest from that last week. Lindsay is back with us to try to get through this really long monster recording. But you guys all haven't met her yet. So, Lindsay, introduce yourself again, please. For the first time.
For sure. Hi, guys. Yeah, for the first time again. Yeah, I'm Lindsay. I'm super, super stoked to be back. And honestly, I'm kind of not sorry because now we get to hit both chapters.
You planned that, didn't you? That's why you came back, so you would be able to.
I was like, how do I get on more of this? Because Morgan has chapter 19. It's like, how do I monopolize more Egwene time?
Oh, sure. Just spoiler our next guest. Thanks a lot. No. It's fine. It's a spoilers podcast.
That's my bad. But yeah, so I also have a podcast called Behind the Timeline that you guys can check out. That's like a film history podcast. We also talk about more kind of up-to-date stuff when it's happening. We'll pull out the temp pad. So we're going to be doing the Batman. Will be coming out after that releases this coming weekend. And then we're also doing all kinds of stuff in the 80s. We just did The Breakfast Club. We're going to be doing Labyrinth. So lots of fun stuff happening there. And then we'll be hitting the 90s. So we're kind of like going through chronologically, mostly genre-y sci-fi fantasy stuff. But we're also doing like critical things in the timeline like John Hughes. So you check us out for sure. And we cover the Wheel of Time. So when the show is on, we'll be talking about the Wheel of Time.
Nice.
To bring it back to why we're all here and why I'm here.
I think we had very long conversations about some of the 80s and 90s content while Aradia sat there and rolled her eyes. But I think
because I'm a 90s kid. So it's like, oh, you're about to get to my era. All the stuff you've done, I'm sure is very nice. And you two can have nostalgia about it. But.
Exactly. But I'm really stoked about the 90s.
In particular, I think we had a disagreement about the Never-Ending Story. I remember correctly, you not liking that.
Oh, yeah. We have three very divergent opinions. As I recall, I've deliberately never seen it because I think I'd hate it. Lindsay hates it and Seth loves it, if I recall correctly.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I do.
Seth, you have all the childhood feels for it, which is what I lack. I watched this movie and I said, no, thank you. Absolutely not. Like, did not like that.
There's something extremely magical about the idea of a book coming to life.
That's what the Page Master's for.
So we talk about that in our episode at length, that I agree. I'm really into the conceit and like the concept. I contend that Imagination Land did it significantly better. I think that like Elf does a lot of like hits some of these same beats better. So we definitely discussed that like it's a concept that totally works. That was executed at like a 1 out of 10. And it was
executed in the 80s.
It was executed in the 80s. Yeah. And to Aradia's point, I actually said to Scott, who's my co-host on our podcast, we were talking about Never-Ending Story and how much I hated it and how much he hated it. And we were like, if we watch one that is just that bad, let's just take it off the list and let's just not do it because we hate it and we just rail on it for an hour and a half. And I was like, yeah, but have you seen the timeline? Like that's not going to happen again. Like we just got to get through the next like couple of months and then it's the 90s and everything just turns into gold.
Ouch.
So
I
was like, I don't even have that conversation.
Oh, I think I swallowed something wrong when you said that. The 90s are better than the 80s. Oh.
You look like you're suffering.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. It's so true. I'm really, really stoked for all the 90s stuff. We have like Great Mouse Detective coming up. That is very exciting to me. So for all of your Disney nerd stuff, check out Behind the Timeline and also all of the other stuff, but a lot of Disney nerd stuff happening in there too, which I enjoy. And the Wheel of Time, which I'm ready to like jump the gun on the question I know I need to answer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How did you find the Wheel of Time and how did you find what spoilers?
Yeah. So I found the Wheel of Time on the Song of Ice and Fire Reddit. so I'm a big Song of Ice and Fire fan, but also huge critic of it. So I'm equally as angry as I am enthusiastic about everything in the world of Ice and Fire. But in the subreddits for that, like back in the day in the early 2000s, the conversation was all about what happens if George R.R. Martin dies, right? And it's still kind of the conversation. And that's how I heard about the Wheel of Time, was sort of apropos of Brandon Sanderson and of what happened with Robert Jordan and finishing the series, and how like the conversation was, this will never happen for Ice and Fire the way it did for Wheel of Time. Like they did it right, and that won't happen for us. And I was like, what is this? And so I dug into it, and and when I finished the books, I read them in like 2016, I want to say. So I read them through a couple of times and then found the podcast. And I was like, surely someone is talking about this in a way that puts it together for me. Because I was struggling, as I'm sure we all did in our first couple of rereads, to really put it all together, because it just takes so long. And I was like, surely someone can tell me what the fuck right now. And that's when I found you guys. And I was like, yes, spoilers. I need you to put it in context of everything that happens in the 15 books surrounding this event so that I know what's going on.
Oh, that's a great use of Reddit.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful use of Reddit.
Right? To take you away from Ice and Fire and move into something different. Yes.
Well, and to discover the books through like a concern for one series, like leads you into like a really like backdoor like recommendation for another series. And then it like you need spoilers. So you look for spoilers, and they exist because the podcast was named in a very direct fashion.
Yeah. I feel like I grabbed
very
that niche.
Clear.
Yeah. pretty much snagged that right off the top. It's I almost feel like the decade after, or maybe the 5 years after the show came out, is a bit of a lost decade for fantasy genre, because everything that came out after that time was more like murder porn based on George R.R. Martin. I think of other books, and I'm like, there was a bunch of murder porn that came out that I feel like just didn't advance the fantasy genre, because everyone was copying George R.R. Martin instead of copying who they should have been, which is Wheel of Time, who was the next step.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I like, in the other medium perspective, they announced the Lord of the Rings show prior to announcing the Wheel of Time show, right? They were pretty much back to back, but they announced Lord of the Rings first all those years ago now. And I lost my shit. I remember the fit that I threw. Because I love Tolkien. I'm a massive, massive fan of the Legendarium. Don't get me wrong. Like, but I was like, fucking seriously, we're not going to do Wheel of Time. Like you got, because I was like, why don't you go after those rights? Like, why are you going to make Lord of the Rings somehow again, but also not Lord of the Rings? And also, how do you have the rights to this, and what is going on? And why not just do Wheel of Time? Why are we rehashing this? And I was pissed for a minute. I was really pissed about that. So yeah, I feel you. There was a weird, like, people scrambling to fill that hole in like weird ways after Game of Thrones ended. But
now, yeah, I feel like we're getting back. Some of the newer novels, Broken Earth, that sort of genre has gone into a direction that I really appreciate. Rape is not a character building moment. Can we please move past that?
Please. Yeah.
Nodding.
Yeah. Major nodding. One last thing we want to announce before we get going is the dates for SpoilerCon. Save the date. We are doing an in-person only event in Portland, Oregon, at the same place as last year, on September 23rd, 24th, and 25th of 2022. So save the date. Follow us at SpoilerCon on social media.
Get vaccinated.
Get vaccinated. That's very important information. And Seth, I will give the other announcement to you.
So the other thing I wanted to shout out was a shout out to Painted Dead for just all the donations you've been giving the past few months. It's really been appreciated. You've gone above and beyond. And so I just wanted to give you a special shout out here on the podcast to say thank you.
And thanks to all of our patrons for being amazing, but also thanks to this one individual patron for being particularly amazing.
But yes, thank you to everyone who supported us through the thick and the thin and through the years. You know, this keeps coming out every week because of you guys.
Yeah, really appreciate that.
Really appreciate that.
And with that, I will now allow you to introduce our chapter, though I believe we had our guest read us in.
We did. I just wanted to introduce her, if that's okay.
Okay, go for it.
Yes,
backseat driving.
Hey, you want to take the wheel? Go for it. I'm
good to go.
I never even got my license. I tell you what. I shouldn't be driving this thing. So today, we're here to do Chapter 17, Out on the Ice. And our symbol is the Flame of Tar Valon. Yeah, I want to have our guest read us in.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
The next morning, a column rode north from the Aes Sedai camp well before dawn, near silent except for the creak of saddles and the crunch of hooves breaking through the snow's crisp crust. Occasionally, a horse snorted or metal jingled and was quickly muffled. The moon was already down, the light glistening with stars, but the pale blanket lying over everything below lightened the darkness. When the first glimmers of day appeared in the east, they had been riding a good hour or more, which was not to say they'd traveled far. Over some stretches, Egwene could let Daishar go at a slow canter that sprayed white like splashing water. But for the most part, the horses walked, and not quickly, through sparse forest where the snow made deep drifts below and clung to branches overhead. Oak and pine, sour gum and leatherleaf, and trees she did not recognize, all looked even more bedraggled than they had in the heat and drought. Today was the Feast of Abram, but there would be no prizes baked in honey cakes. The light send some people found surprises in the day, though. The sun rose and climbed, a pale golden ball that gave no warmth. Every breath still bit the throat and produced a puff of mist. A sharp wind blew, not hard, but cutting, and to the west, dark clouds rolled north on their way to Andor. She felt a touch of pity for whoever would know the burden of those clouds, and relief that they were heading away. Waiting another day would have been maddening. She had been unable to sleep at all for fidgety restlessness, not headaches. Restlessness and tendrils of fear that had crept in like cold air under the edges of the tent. She was not tired, though. She felt like a compressed spring, a tight-wound clock full of energy that wanted desperately to find release. Light, everything could still go horribly wrong.
Such a smooth read.
Thank you. That is such beautiful writing by Jordan, and the alliteration that's in that first paragraph. And I don't know why I just closed my book like I'm not going to be looking at
Read
it.
accomplished.
I'm like, and we're good. And that was perfect, right? That's it. See you guys
Peace
later.
out.
But the alliteration's like so beautiful. The crisp crust and the deep drifts, and it's the produced puff of mist and all these hard consonants that I think you feel how cold it is and how much the Bowl of the Winds has been at work, and it's just such beautiful writing, and it's like an onomatopoeia, the whole thing, right?
Yeah, really. I never had noticed that before, but yeah, this is a chapter that has very cold, crisp, clean air, like that kind of energy, and I never could really put my finger on why. I was just like, Robert Jordan, he writes that way. But yeah, to have you actually point out it's this hard consonant alliteration is that's it. That's why it feels like snow. It's oh god, it's so good. It's so good, and a little bit challenging to read.
Those are the skills of a writer that are totally beyond me. I'm just what? How do you even think of that? How do you get to that point as your skill? I wouldn't even, the concept of thinking about alliteration, especially the way I read in my head, would never occur to me, right? I wouldn't even think about that, But the way then you immediately notice it and point out, I'm like, oh, it works. It's genius writing on a level I didn't even think Jordan could produce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a great analogy of Egwene compressed like a spring, which is really what you feel like the whole way through the next three chapters, right? And really the prior one or two. This whole kind of stretch of Egwene chapters is keeping the secret of what her plan is from the reader, because it is super hard to figure out, as we've been finding, that it's even for us going through it for the 1,000th time, I'm like, what's your plan, sweetie? What are we going to do? And she's just so on edge through all of this, and you really feel it all the way up until the end of chapter 19, right?
Yeah, absolutely. She's on such high alert. And yeah, you definitely, these chapters are anxious making because she is so wound up which is good writing, but it's also like, it's like, oh God, Jordan, why are you going to put me in the head of someone who is so tightly wound? Like, I'm tightly wound enough. I'm trying to relax.
Especially because we as the reader don't know what the plan is, at least the first time through, right? Like,
or
we don't know at this point.
I still barely know what she's doing despite podcasting through it.
It's very confusing. I won't lie, but it's clever, which is what I like about Egwene.
I mean, basically, my understanding is she's trying to get the nobles to disbelieve the Aes Sedai so that she can then get them to make a declaration that will then give her power. And so it's this bit of like putting everybody in the right headspace and in the right location where they get disrespected in just the right way to be just arrogant enough to make this declaration without thinking about it too much. That's the key, is like she can't let them think about the consequences of the declaration of declaring war.
It's amazingly subtle and complicated. And how does one even think of this, much less successfully execute it?
But yeah, I imagine it goes back to like, she's talking to Suon. She's like, how do I get power? And she's like, well, if we were at war, you'd be the number one person. It's like, well, how can we do that? And it's like, well, I can't get them to declare war against like a country or the White Tower, but maybe against a person. And it's like, how do we get them to declare war against a person? Like, I can see the steps as they work backwards through Suon's mind. And when you have that goal in mind, it's a really interesting path for me. But seeing it progress forward, it's like the difference between multiplying two large numbers and factoring those two large numbers, right? One is very easy, one is very hard, and it's like,
I'm overwhelmed already.
You can go in one direction very easily, but the other one you're just like, how did you get those people's motivations to line up that way so effectively?
And the goal in the end here is like, how does Egwene get control over how the Aes Sedai handle Rand, right? That's like
how the rebellion against the White Tower.
The rebellion. Okay.
Yeah, because if she hadn't had her way, probably what would have happened is the support for the Rebel Tower would have dwindled over time. People would have ended up going back to the White Tower, and Elaida would have reunited the tower underneath her, only with her power in place. But using Suon's Red Sitters are creating false dragons to keep people angry at Elaida, angry at the White Tower, kept them separate, and then using the Band of the Red Hand to get them moving so they'd start attacking the White Tower and wouldn't just sit there forever. So that was the two prongs of their first plan, was get everybody moving, make sure they stay mad at Elaida. Once you've done those two things, insult them with nobles so that they declare war on Elaida, and not realizing that declaring war gives you 100% dictatorial power over the rebellion. And then once you have all the power, you can just order them to do whatever the hell you want.
Right. And so that's why this was one of the things that had me confused coming out of like chapter 16 is she's happy that Ramonda and Lelaine are fighting with each other because she needs to keep everyone in the dark, like you were saying, right? Like the less time everyone has to think, the more information or the less information that they have, the less likely it is that they are all gonna, go back to Elaida, basically, right? Or have any kind of plan that works against her, or be able to like go up against her machinations here in any way, because they just don't know what's going on. So they show up at this meeting and they're like waiting for one of the two of them to be announced. And when nobody is, then nobody says anything and she just gets to have her way, right? That took me a minute for that to put that together.
Yeah, she wants the hall to be gridlocked in terms of trying to decide between Ramonda or Lelaine. So that way they're not like off doing their own thing, making their own declarations, acting independently. She wants them united in waiting to support which one of these two sitters, who is then forced to just sit there and take it when Egwene takes control, which is amazing.
She wants to be the vice president in a 50-50 Senate. Right?
Yeah.
She gets to make the deciding vote every time. So even though the Senate appears to be gridlocked and like they're and you've got this like useless vice president who has no power, they're the one actually making the decision every single time.
Right.
That's sort of where she is now, and then she wants to go from that to more of a dictatorial president without who can't be vetoed. Right. So very different positions, but she's going from one to the other.
For sure. There's stages to her process of actually taking the tower. She has to get multiple authoritarian power structures along the way towards reuniting into something that might be called, I don't know what their structure is supposed to be called normally, but it's not normally quite as authoritarian as the thing she's trying.
But I really do feel like that's the genius of these steps, right? She takes progress, and each step she takes gives her more power over more of the Aes Sedai.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And she's not sure that she's going to ever make it to the next step, right? She's like really hoping that she does, to being able to declare war, but she's not sure, which is why I think in this chapter she'll throw in that the novice book is open to everybody, right? She like sees her opening and she's like, all right, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I seem to have everyone's attention right now. So here's the situation. It's what we're going to do.
Also, she's in a place where she forces Romaine to sort of confirm everything she says to the nobles. They can't say no. And that locks them into all of her declarations. None of them can get away with saying, oh, no, we're not going to do that, because the Amarlin said they're going to do that. And then they have to affirm that to a bunch of nobles, or else they'll be politically like, wait, what's going on? Is this Rebel Tower broken? Like, she manipulates them very carefully. She could not make those declarations in front of just Aes Sedai. She had to make them in front of Aes Sedai and nobles.
Mm-hmm. No. Oh, hell no. Oh my God, Romaine would never have gone for that. If she tried to do that in the hall with the novice book, not a chance in hell. That's funny. Yeah. And I think she comments on that in the next chapter, in chapter 18 a bit, where she says, no one was going to say I wasn't telling, truths. It's not here. Like, we're okay now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because that's the entire point of this thing, is to prove to the Aes Sedai how fragile their hold on the moral high ground is. And when they realize that they can't say a single thing against her and she can do whatever she wants, and if they do a single eyelash out of place, then it ruins everything. That scares them into realizing how weak they look to everyone else, and helps solidify their need to make this war declaration, so that way they can be taken seriously again.
Mm-hmm. And she gets lucky here, right? With the, I think they had a educated guess that these armies would show up if they hovered around long enough, but that wasn't a guarantee or a setup.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things I think about is, like a game of chess, when they started playing the game, they didn't know exactly how it was going to end up, but you make plans along the way and be like, okay, if this happens, then this. And that's all their scheming wasn't necessarily to just come up with this one plan. They came up with 100 plans, depending on the circumstances.
Right. It's very adaptable. Like Swan in particular, that's her style of scheming, is something that is very flexible and very able to think on its feet. She's not a rigid thinker. She's a very creative thinker.
I like to see Swan's notebook of all of her possible outcomes here. Cause I'm like, what happens if these guys don't show up? But I mean, it was an educated guess. It paid off. I don't know what would have happened if they hadn't shown though. But I think that Gareth Bryn probably did help with some of the, what to expect, right? Mm-hmm. Sitting right there on the border of Andor, and he knows what's going on. I can imagine there's a conversation potentially with him, or picking his brain somewhere, that Swan is like, so if we hang out here long enough, what do you think who might appear?
Yeah, what would you do if a bunch of people parked on your border? How would you have responded? Yeah, totally. I mean, probably more subtle than that, but yeah, for sure.
Probably. But I think, as we learn in the next chapter too, Talmanis might not have been a bad person to ask. He seems to know what he's doing as well.
But I want to focus us back on this chapter
right.
for a second. So the next thing I have is basically her making an announcement to everybody that she's heard from Bryn that there's an army on the border. So what she wants to do is stop everybody for a couple of days until that news gets there, right? So she makes an announcement, hey, I'm going to stop the caravan for 2, perhaps 3 days, just because, for various reasons.
What chapter are you reading? Are you reading the last chapter?
16?
No, I was going to say... Yeah, you're on 16. We're in 17 and 18.
We already went over that.
Well, I mean, sure, Seth, but we're kind of talking about this chapter. This is sort of what's happening.
You didn't hear me read the chapter of the title of the completely wrong chapter? Chapter 16.
I checked out just enough
to
read
hear
out Keen, on the ice. But not the number that went in front.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. Yeah. So today we're here to do chapter 17 out on the ice.
We're doing great.
I knew we were repeating a chapter. I just got confused about which one.
I'm sorry. That was bad co-piloting on my part.
I'm sure I thought at worst you'd misspoke but knew where we were at. I'm like, yeah, nope. No, I mean, totally. We're on our way. It's Then I think the next thing that we have for this chapter, I'll take us on track, Seth, is an Uno appearance. That's very exciting to everyone.
Yes. Yes. Uno is here, and that is what really matters. Seth's face right now is just so abashed.
I'm not bright red or anything.
It's great. It's great.
No.
It's
Did it get hot in here, or is that just me?
That's so funny. Yeah, Uno's here, and Uno's like, it seems like Egwene is sort of noting that he's here for the first time in her mind, because I know when I read this, I was like, no shit. Where'd you come from? Like, I kind of didn't clock that he was with us right now. There's so many people chilling around Egwene.
Yeah, I feel like we knew he was here, but we haven't seen him in a while on screen. So it's like we need to be reminded, not that he left, but just that it's been a while since he was peripherally in this area.
Yeah, and like maybe since because Egwene says a man she'd met once what seemed like an age ago, not like, oh, and also Uno is still here. Like, it doesn't seem like she clocked it up to this point, but maybe we saw it from another POV.
Well, Nynaeve was the one who was really obsessed with like, oh, I can run away to Uno at any time, right? If I want to.
Well, and Uno came with Nynaeve and Elaine. That's how Uno got there, was with Nynaeve and Elaine. And then Egwene shows up and gets to interact with Nynaeve and Elaine, but doesn't necessarily interact with her whole party, which means that Uno and her have not really had much reason to cross paths, I guess, up until now.
Yeah, except back in Eye of the World.
Yeah, well, it does seem like an age ago.
Right, exactly. Like, he's been with the army, but like, there's no reason for him to have interacted with the Amerlin just because he's in Saladar. He's just a soldier who happens to know her from way back in book 1.
I think it for some reason blanked for me that he left Saladar with them. That's what I didn't totally clock. Like, I remember him being in Saladar with Nynaeve and everybody. And then, yeah, he's still with them. I guess that's the realization I'm having. It's like, and you guys you stayed together. That actually tracks. That actually makes sense.
He stayed with the army instead of like going to Abu Dar or whatever. He stayed with the Aes Sedai.
Right. Well, because that's when it flipped. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the next thing I have is that the Shido are supposedly far away. Just another reminder of all the Shido that are everywhere. And also we're getting in the middle of all this about Uno and the Shido is descriptions of the column in general. Lots of clothes, lots of armor. They've got a really nice flag that was made. So they've got their White Tower flag. So just a whole bunch of strategic and costuming stuff. And Egwene is like, I want witnesses to what I'm doing today. Grandiose thoughts. It's a very long day for her. And she's getting real psyched up to do it.
Yep. And there's a lot of very obvious Dark Friend alerts about Halima and Delana.
Halima particularly is, bad at riding a horse, because why would you do that back in the, Third Age? Like, horses were, like you and I would be bad at riding a horse, right? Like,
I am not the most graceful on a horse. I've been on a horse a few times, but I'm not good at it.
Writes with a really blocky, terrible hand, like she's learning how to write for the first time because she's learning how to write common for the first time, and also not feeling the cold at any point, just like an Aes Sedai. Like the number of times she's not felt cold, just like an Aes Sedai, is a little too many.
Mm-hmm. And she flaunts it too. She's like got her, I think her bosom is out, as I believe it's described at some point in here.
The low-cut dress.
Yep, and she's stoked about that.
But it's so funny that everyone sees her bosom out as like, oh, she's flirting, not that she's ignoring cold.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They're like, oh, she must be really suffering. It's like, I guess if you've ever seen people clubbing in the winter, the skin out thing is a thing. Yeah.
Beauty is pain. These are the arrangements you make when you want to. The prettier you want to look, the more uncomfortable you're going to have to be. This is an unfortunate truth.
That's correct.
Is that why men are so ugly? They refuse to accept pain and
shoes as well.
Response
that
for beauty
probably has like 99%.
Yeah.
Society refuses to force you.
Exactly. Yeah.
No one's telling you that's a requirement. I don't know. Something somewhere in there.
Like we've just
you're onto something.
Yeah. I feel like there's a line there with men. We're like, no, I'm not going to do that. It hurts. And women are like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's part of looking good. I'm like, no.
Same with birth control, how all the side effects of birth control, men won't accept it, and women are like, well, we have to accept that and the risk of childbirth. Yeah, that checks out. That seems fair. Sure. But tell us about how condoms are uncomfortable.
Totally.
But I mean, at least birth control's not expensive, right?
God help us. Oh my God. Being given a societal option definitely helps. But I do like this with Halima, and
there's also some Shiriam stuff that she did just get beaten in the last chapter, so it's just sort of reminding us of that. But it's like, just in case you missed the part where she got beaten, I guess.
She's like uncomfortable. She can't sit her saddle because she just got her ass beat by Halima, right?
Yeah.
Shiriam was the Dark Friend reveal that surprised me the most of all of them. Like, I somehow didn't catch it, even though it's like really clear.
So obvious.
And I know it's like really, it's like upsetting that I didn't catch it. It's like the one that you are supposed to get. And I did not get Shiriam. Like it didn't resonate with me. I didn't have a moment where I was like, Shiriam, until everyone re-swears the oaths after Egwene retakes control of the tower, like in the end, like until the culling of the Black Asha, I didn't know. And I was like, oh my God. I was so upset.
To me, it was obvious that Shiriam was scheming. It wasn't obvious that she was black. Right? Like, I think that's the thing, is like all the Aes Sedai are scheming. And that's why Daes Dammar was founded by the White Tower, in particular the Black Asha, right? Because they're hiding. They can't lie. So they want people to be scheming, and that sort of suspicious behavior to always be tacitly ignored.
Right. It's like part of the expectation of being Aes Sedai.
Right. That you're going to be sneaking around, that you're not going to want to tell whole truths, that you're going to want to, disappear for times where nobody knows where you are. Like, I do think that's very Black Aja, and they set up that culture deliberately to hide stuff like this. And I think she hides, like a needle in a haystack. Like, she hides really well. I also think needle in a haystack is a really apt description for the Black Aja, because you're always going to get fucking stabbed when you find one.
I've always wondered about that part about that saying. Like, looking for a needle in a haystack sounds really dangerous. You're going to get stabbed.
Yeah. And it's an uncomfortable, like a haystack is kind of an uncomfortable environment anyway.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, which is very like the Aes Sedai anyway. It's kind of like, none of this is great. But I think, like, I appreciate you trying to make me look like less of an idiot, Seth, but I do think that it is pretty obvious that she's a Dark Friend once she gets her ass beat by a Forsaken in the prior chapter. It was kind of the giveaway, I think, upon reread of like, how did you not clock this?
Well, I'm trying to make myself seem like less of an idiot because I missed it until Sanderson's books too. Despite many. Oh yeah, totally. This
is where we all should have got it. This is where they tell us when the Forsaken breaks into her quarters and beats her is when we should have figured out that she was Black Asha.
People often look at me and they're like, oh, you know so much about the Wheel of Time. I'm like, no, I don't. That's why I started the podcast. Like, I was trying to figure it out. Like, I missed so much despite my many read-throughs. It's a process of research and talking to other people and doing a podcast that has taught me much more about the Wheel of Time than I ever knew, despite my many rereads. Or, plus Sanderson likes to spoil a bunch of stuff in his books. So
there's that.
Nodding to all of that. Okay, so.
Oh, I had one funny thing just to mention the Bowl of the Winds before we move into like the proper section here, because I know we're trying to move a little more quickly, but I like that when they pass a bunch of foxes still in their summer furs. So more with like the weathers just being jacked.
Animals haven't had a chance to transition yet, yeah.
Because we established it is mid-January, right? Which is what we talked about last time that you guys clarified for me that it like...
Or was it mid-February?
It's right around mid-February. It's right around now when we're recording this. It's basically the same time of year as when we're recording this episode.
Yeah, it's like still winter, so it takes them that long. So I like all of the weather shenanigans in this chapter, like just sort of below the surface, reminding us that all of this is problematic and a difficult period of transition.
That they went from full summer to full winter in a course of about 6 weeks, and that has caused many a problem. Was it even 6? Was it like 3, 4, something like that?
I think it might have been like 2. I feel like in the last chapter they were like, when it first snowed last week, we were so stoked, and now everything's fucked. Like, I think it was a really fast turnover.
Yeah, I think it's been a week and a half Randland time, something like that. Like, it's really quick. I forget exactly. We figured it out in a recent episode. Our people who are binging will know better than us. Okay, so Talmanis is at the lake. It's kind of the next. I'm just skipping through a lot of descriptions of people doing stuff. But Talmanis is there, uninvited, which is a great opportunity for Egwene to talk to him, as we see in the next chapter, but also like makes the stakes even higher because he just invites himself to this thing, even though he's supposed to be a dog on a leash. He's taking agency. How dare he? Men are so inconvenient.
I mean, technically, isn't he uninvited to like the entire trip? Like he's just tagging along completely uninvited. His whole army is.
Well, I mean, he was technically invited by Egwene's plan to use the band to scare the sisters into having motivations to something politics. Like technically he was invited, but like only Egwene and Swan know that. Like everyone else thinks he's not invited. So
yeah. And also he was like, I'm pretty sure Matt said stay here, right? Because he thinks that Egwene's going to want an out from this situation. And so he's kind of encouraged the band to stay while he's in Abu Dar. And then, yeah, I think he's kind of, and we'll talk about this more as we get into the next chapter, but he's kind of outused his usefulness to Egwene at this point. So yeah, he's just sort of here. But I was stoked to remember that he was here because these are some of the little details that you can skip over sometimes, like with Uno. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. What's up?
And it took me a minute to reconstruct his journey, but he ends up staying with the Murandians for a while until he feels Matt's ta'veren is tugging on him, and then he goes down to meet Matt in Abu Dar.
Right.
He goes all the way to Abu Dar, or he meets him
on the road. Like, yeah, he's heading to Abu Dar, and Matt's leaving Abu Dar, but they basically meet outside. And that's when Matt's being pursued by all the people trying to kill Tuon. He's kidnapped her and he's running away. And that's when he runs into Talmanis. And then he can and then that's suddenly when she's like, oh my gosh, he's not just a toy. He's actually like a general.
Right. She's like, oh, hang on. Wait, you were serious? And yeah, which honestly should be everyone's reaction to Matt always.
It's like lion on the plane, I think is the phrase.
Yes. Yes.
But we don't get a lot of that from Talmanis' POV. Yeah. He's just here and then he appears there. And it's like, wait, what happened? And you have to like reconstruct a couple of quotes to figure out that.
Yeah, basically what he says he's going to do in the next chapter lays out what actually happens. Like what he says in the next chapter is pretty much exactly what ends up happening, which is nice. But yeah, it's very, very quick and subtle. And you have no reason to remember that in the book when it's happening because it was a one-off mention here in this book, which is mostly about Egwene. So you don't really think about the Talmanis part.
And it is all very ta'veren, and they talk about that a lot we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. When we get into that in the next chapter, they talk about that a bunch. And yeah, I think they meet up right after the Vale and Luca stuff with Matt, right? After Matt finishes up with the circus. Like he gets out of Abu Dar and up toward Murandy when they meet up with Matt. I think he's like mostly all the way out of Abu Dar at that point. But
agreed.
Yeah, they're out of Shan-Chan control lands.
Right, and he splits off from the circus, and then shortly after that joins up with the band. It's very ta'veren timing. It all works out quite perfectly because Talmanis is a very good follower of ta'veren.
Yeah, he recognizes it. He's like, I have a ta'veren situation, Egwene. I actually
I've got a little ta'veren situation.
And she's like, oh, I need to handle this.
I love Egwene's response. Ta'veren can't affect you if they're not there, right? And it's like, oh, God, you have no idea.
Such a literalist. She's such a literalist. She's failing her white Aja, like, compass. And yes, they can affect things away from themselves.
Her white Aja test.
The pattern isn't a geographical phenomenon.
Right. This is not a Euclidean phenomena. This is a non-Euclidean force moving through space-time. Okay.
Yeah. And Egwene is rarely, that I remember, impacted directly by ta'veren. Like she doesn't talk a lot about like the ta'veren tugging the way that characters like Talmanis are impacted by it.
Well, so here's the question. Is she a secondary ta'veren? This is something we talked about a lot in the early podcast, right? Is the fact that Matt, Rand, and Perrin need her causing her to get a lot of good lucky breaks in her way, right? Because not that she's ta'veren, but that she's very proximate to ta'veren, and so her life is charmed in the same way because they need her to be in a certain position.
they need her to be charmed. So it's not about being drawn into them. It's about having your own life work out great for you. Wouldn't that be the best outcome? Talmanis does say to her later in the next chapter, like, are you sure that you're not Ta'Viren? When they're having this conversation, he does say that to her. So yeah, I think that actually makes the most sense.
And I don't think Ta'Viren draws you in all the time. It's only when you're needed, right? Yeah. Ta'Viren is like, that's the thing is like, Perrin isn't drawn to Rand all the time, only when he was needed because he got kidnapped. That's what pulled Perrin out of the Two Rivers, got him to travel all the way, and like, there was a lot. So Ta'Viren isn't always one thing. It has a lot to do with what you need, and it affects your life and the people around you. And it's the pattern arranging everybody so that things work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do agree. I've often thought that Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine, all three of them really benefit from the Ta'Viren people's need for them to be in a certain place at a certain power level, in a certain position in their social hierarchies, to be able to influence them. And that does make their lives a little bit charmed. So yeah, Egwene does not get to talk about if Ta'Viren affects things or not. She's too close to the source to be allowed to have that opinion.
And if you want to get real meta about it, you could say that like she's a main character and Ta'Viren-ness is like main character-ness. And so like,
yeah, basically,
Robert Jordan needs her to be in a certain spot. So there's a certain amount of tugging that like has to happen.
Absolutely. Continuing on with this chapter, they arrive at an frozen over lake. The last touches of setup are still happening because they got there very, very quickly. And they get a crap greeting, an absolutely crap greeting. It's the Feast of Abram.
And on the Feast of Abram, too.
Yeah, you're supposed to get like a warm cup of tea and a special kiss and like a little bit of honey cake. It's a very it's the day to honor travelers, which we looked up last time. And the Feast of Abraham is an actual real world thing that is honoring Abraham, the Judeo prophet, for wandering around. It's a traveler's holiday. So this is a very easy real world parallel. And they get completely snubbed. They get off their horses and walk towards the pavilion in absolute silence. They get no ceremonial greeting, no greeting at all. It's very awkward and weird. And they walk in the tent and there's not enough seats. And so they move all the seats out onto the ice, literally. Well, the whole thing was on the ice, but they take it all outside and set it up so that there's enough seats.
And there's a reason why it's on the ice, right? Because the ice can only hold so many people. It's frozen. It was warm here a week and a half ago, as we just established. So this ice is only frozen very recently and relatively thinly. Mm-hmm. So you can fit tens of horses, but not hundreds or thousands, because everybody goes in the drink and dies.
Mutually assured destruction through geography. It's a beautiful thing,
which I like a lot. And my comment on this too, that I think is because we've been having a lot of conversations about the validity of whether the Aes Sedai should be taking the oaths, right? And that conversation's going on through multiple POVs with everybody down at the Bowl of the Winds, plus everyone here, and Egwene and Swan are talking about it. And what they say about this is that she says, of course, a pavilion beyond bowshot was not beyond the range of the One Power, not if it could be seen, except that the worst man in the world knew himself safe from that unless he threatened his sister. Mm-hmm. So the existence of the oaths is the only thing that allows this to go forward anyway, because otherwise they'd feel at risk. So kind of some evidence for keeping the oaths as part of Aes Sedai culture here. And it's like not really pointed out in the text, but it's there. And I'm like, okay, it's like a real world application of why Swan is right. I can get down. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that visibility and Aes Sedai threat go hand in hand, right? It's this very much like, because if you can see something, you can channel at it, right? So the idea that attacking, one of the things that sort of equalizes the plane between channelers and sides without channelers is like a big forest. Right. And we see that later on in this book when Rand tries to take on the Shan-Chan. What stymies him? Not the tactics, not the rockin', not anything else. It's the forest that they're in. He's like, I don't know where anybody is, and so I can't destroy them. Mm-hmm. And so I think we got a similar situation here where it's like the only reason why they're willing to come out into the open and be vulnerable is because of those oaths. Because you go up against a channeler in the open, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Poor Rand, unable to destroy everyone in sight.
I know.
Poor baby has such a hard time committing war crimes.
Yeah, it's so difficult for him to murder everyone he sees. It's like, I feel bad for him.
Which does create an interesting question. Remember when he spun that ball of lightning that killed all the Trollocs throughout the entire stone? He clearly couldn't see the entire stone.
Right.
He made a little AI that went out and sought and destroyed and then self-destructed once it had finished the job. It was very weird, and I wish that they had done it more often, but he can't remember how he did it. It's dumb.
Of course. Well, and it reminds me of kind of the way that he wards like Kalendor, for instance, or that you can have like specific booby traps. Like it does seem that you can kind of program a weave for an if this then that situation. So I could see sending out a lightning bolt that has an if this then that to take out all the Trollocs, right? Like that totally makes sense.
If dark spawn, then lightning, right?
Then lightning, yeah, that totally makes sense. I also think lightning's like
because you can do it with
wards.
Wards, thank you.
Right, exactly. So I like that about like. Because I don't mind the harder magic system with Sanderson. I really don't. I like that a lot. Like I like the Androl and the gateways. Like come on, that's the coolest thing in the book.
It's real cool.
It just is. Like it's all of them. It is the coolest, and or at least it's up there. But there is still like a lot of elements of that in Jordan's writing too, where you can kind of. There is that hard magic system. It's just maybe not as explored as much as Sanderson likes to dig into it. But yeah, I could totally see that. I also think lightning's kind of almost an exception sometimes with the way the waves work, because there's lots of examples of Rand, like even when he has good visibility of kind of giant plane right at the end of the last book, or is it the end of this book when he takes everybody out, when he takes all of the
this book, yeah.
Shan out. It's this book, huh? And is that what you were talking about, Seth, where he's in the woods? Or is that, I felt like he had a higher vantage point at that moment. That's what I was thinking there were two.
He's on a ridge, but he's in the woods.
Got it. Okay.
He's overlooking woods, right? So he can see the entire wooded land, and that's why he attacks everybody, including his own troops.
Yeah, but he can't. Well, so that makes sense. So he can just rain down destruction, but he can't. It's a bit of a Thanos moment. That makes sense. Sense. I have more Halima being obviously a Forsaken.
Challenging the Andorians and the Murandians with, just lounging in the winter weather like it's nothing.
Taking the higher seats than everybody. Yeah, so Egwene decides not to take any shit, right? They're not going to give her any words of welcome on this Feast of Abram. She's going to sit up above everybody else and fuck you, and that's Egwene's plan, and it works.
We've got 8 nobles, 4 Murandians, 4 Andorans. The Andorans in particular come up a lot with the Secession War and Elaine's plotline.
But yeah, none of them are particularly interesting. We've talked about them plenty at this point for this time. It's just the name salad. Don't worry about it. Nobody interesting.
Yep, it is name salad. No, but they don't even do anything later. They all sit out the succession, so.
No, one of them asks about the novice book, which is neat. And a couple of them, they tell Egwene to shove off later. But yeah, they come up later. It's fine.
Yeah.
And the Murandians don't come up again at all. They're just whatever. I think actually it's a Murandian who asks about going to the tower, but it's,
No, they're gone. They're no one. They don't, it doesn't, they're like, it truly doesn't matter.
And it's like Pelavar supports Dylan,
right? Yeah.
But won't support Elaine.
For a minute though, right? They also, during a plot line that.
Yeah, and then he dies and his son takes over and supports
deeply
Elaine.
Uninteresting to me.
He never changes his mind. He gets killed. So, yeah.
Yeah. Mom. And they are all, to the point of them all being cowards, they all do say, well, if we don't do anything and we just let you go through Andor unchallenged, then what if the real Aes Sedai in the White Tower get mad at us, and we don't want that to happen. So they're just trying to cover their own asses. This whole thing is just about what do I do or not do to piss off the most powerful people the least, right? I think is their angle mostly coming into this. Just not admirable from anybody here.
Well, and I get that. You're looking at 2 forces of channelers going up against each other, and you pick the wrong side. They could come down on you hard.
Right. But they're also in a situation where there is no non-reaction, and they have to do something, and they've chosen to challenge the so-called rebels. And that's where Egwene gets the fire to light under the asses of the sitters to get her declaration of war, is that when there is no neutral choice, they sided with Elida. And this is why. And that's right. Really critical. They just force the situation.
And Dumai's Wells looming really large over kind of everything that these guys are saying here, right? Where they say, we don't want to be involved in a war between the Aes Sedai. We saw what happened out east. We heard about this shit. Like, and they think there's a risk of them coming after the Black Tower as well.
How much of that is the supposed, like, Aes Sedai weapon of the exploding gateway? Well,
that wasn't out. That was in Ebudar, though.
I guess that probably hasn't made its way back.
Yeah.
It just happened. And it didn't happen out east. They specifically say a few times out east,
Gotcha.
where I'm pretty sure they're referring to Dumai's Wells.
Yeah, Ebudar would be more south from everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, southwest of...
And one thing that's key about this whole plot is this line. That sounded suitably threatening, whether or not Myrelle and the others had managed to prepare her way. With luck, they were on their way back to the camp with no one the wiser unless one of the nobles spoke the wrong name. That would lose her advantage against the Hall. And so that's basically her being like, I arranged what they were going to say to us beforehand so that I would have the right reaction. Maybe not through, like, maybe Myrelle didn't tell the nobles exactly what to say, but she told her what Egwene told Myrelle what to tell the nobles to get them in the right mood. Whether that was to piss them off, I don't know. But if the nobles say, hey, we were visited by these Aes Sedai last night, that could really throw her plans off. So she's trying to avoid that.
Yeah. And the whole thing about the Black Tower is legitimate because we learned that they had considered briefly stopping by the Black Tower to just snuff it out real quick. But the Andorans and...
Pick up some eggs, snuff out the Black Tower,
deal.
Oh my God, they would
so
have
bad.
All died. Every single one of the Rebel Aes Sedai would have been dead or...
Bonded.
I guess bonded.
Which then means they would have gotten
Actually,
turned,
probably more likely bonded.
And it's very, very bad. But the Andorans and the Murandians think, well, this is all subterfuge to sneak getting an army to the Black Tower. And that is just as scary of a war to us as a war between the two sides of the White Tower. So we're still not psyched about that plan. And Egwene reassures them, no, we will take care of that later, but not now, because she has bigger fish to fry, basically, than the Black Tower, and she believes the Aes Sedai blind spot that it's not going to be that big of a deal and they can deal with it later. She doesn't realize how big of a deal it is.
Well, and there are all these rumors of these Aes Sedai making their way into Andor in secret, and those actually are Aes Sedai who are going to the Black Tower to attack it. Those are Elida's Aes Sedai who are doing that.
It's a good hypothesis.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, Pavara's in that crew, right? Mm-hmm. My girl, God, I love her whole everything. She's so awesome. She's one of my favorite Aes Sedai.
Yeah, Pavara and Tovann, and I think everyone else in that group is not useful. But yeah, Pavara and Tovann are the interesting ones in that group. And
everyone else is not useful. Yeah, that's correct. Well, they all end up getting bonded and turned, right? So...
Yeah, Pavara is the only one that escapes.
Yeah, but Pavara and Androl, obviously.
Yeah, some of them
is she the only one?
Yeah.
And most of them get turned. But Pavara is the only one that escapes with her life and her soul.
Mm-hmm. And let's be real, it's because Androl is awesome.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Because she accidentally got super team bonded with Androl and it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I like just all of the fear that the Andorans have and the Murandians here that's like, it's so, because I didn't catch, right, that Myrelle has like been here to prep this. So like how much of what they're saying is like their genuine fear and how much of it is like Egwene said, say this shit. This is really believable. Like this actually works. Like say that you're worried about these things. I wonder how much of it they're really concerned about and how much of it she planted because it really tracks. Like if I'm an Andoran lord, especially one of these cowards, I'm definitely not trying to see a replay of Dumai's Wells or anybody go anywhere near the Black Tower. Like I for sure would be thinking that like all of my lands are going to get destroyed no matter how this plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see that Myrelle planting a bunch of fears so that way Egwene can dispel those very specific fears and say, yes, make them anxious about this so that way my prepared line will work and I don't have to think on my feet. That makes sense.
And is the best solution for everybody, right? Like what I want to do solves these problems that could be conceivably your concerns, right? As well as my priorities. So she finds a nice way to kind of like halfway happy for everybody, right? We'll compromise.
And then so after that conversation, Egwene's basically like, okay, they didn't actually acknowledge me as the Amyrlin seat particularly well. They just kind of ignored me and went to the sitters. But other than that, their disrespect was everything I could have wanted it. Right. That was a perfect success. And reading this for the first time, I was like, yeah, what? Like, why did you want to be disrespected? I don't really get that. Why did you want them to argue against you? Why did you want them to point out very real flaws in your plan? Like, what's going on here? And it's like, well, I can't and I think she's like, I can't say those things, but by saying them to me, I can then go back to the hall with them.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot like how she deals with Ramonda and Lelaine. It really is, where she's like, oh, yeah, they totally talked down to me, but they gave me everything I wanted. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of that. Like, she just keeps taking it. Because, they speak past her to the sitters, but they still say everything she wants to hear. And she's savvy enough to just be okay with that.
It also, like, and I'm only just putting my finger on this, but talking past her puts the sitters in a position where, like we said before, they have to either agree with Egwene and be a united front, which they have to do if they want to be taken seriously as the real tower, the real Amyrlin seat. They have to. And it means that they are put in a position where they have to publicly back her. There is nothing else for them to do. So if they didn't talk past her, then it's just Egwene sort of steamrolling all of this and taking all of the power, at least when they get back to the hall and the sitters have a chance to talk to her in private. What are they going to say? They were there for it. If they hadn't talked past her, it would have been just her.
And the nobles in particular believe these words are coming from, because this child would never come up with her own words. These words. So the reverse works too. Not only does this force the Aes Sedai to, essentially capitulate because they have to acknowledge it to the nobles are also like, oh, this is totally legit coming from all these experienced Aes Sedai, because this is their puppet.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Right. This is what they want her to say. They've all planned this before. Well, and they would, of course, like everyone, probably put a lot more stock in what the Aes Sedai are saying than what's really necessarily there. Right. I think they assume a lot of intelligence and pre-planning and scheming and things like that from the Aes Sedai. I don't think they would realize that the it's like, surprise, bitches. Like, is this a new rule? Like, I don't feel like they would assume that that's what's happening with the Aes Sedai. That's not Occam's razor for, like, what's happening behind the scenes with the sitters. Mm-hmm. So yeah, she just bamboozles everybody, right? Which is why she's awesome, because Egwene is just like the best, like, overachieving millennial. It's why I love her. Right?
Totally.
She's like, I can do it and I know it, but all these boomers don't listen to me and they don't think that I have this together and they don't think that my ideas work. And how do I bamboozle all of you into, like, allowing me into the club? And just like, no, I am going to be in charge and I'm just going to fucking make it work and force myself in. And I love that about her, even when sometimes it's unearned.
Okay, Romaine.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other important thing to note about this negotiation is that the army is going to camp here on the border for a month, and they will pay the Murandians good money for stripping the countryside absolutely bare. And the Murandians have very, very mixed feelings about getting to make all the money, which is completely inedible at this juncture in the timeline.
I love what she says before she announces the 1 month stay. She says, what's the call to arms the band uses? Yes, it was time to toss the dice.
Yes.
Which is why, isn't the header of this chapter a dice?
The header of the next chapter, chapter 18,
next
is,
chapter. Okay.
is the dice.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Shut up, is it? Hey.
So this is Egwene tossing the dice. That's what that is. And also Talmanis is there, so there's a little Band of the Red Hand reference. But yeah, no, I love, and also it's what great generals say, right? Like Pedro Nile said it, Matt says it, like I think we see
Varen
says it. Varen says it. Ildraldo says it.
Yeah.
And now we see Egwene being a great general, marshaling her troops on the field, making a gamble in battle. This is her battle.
And of course, we have to shout out the supposedly originator of the phrase, Caesar.
Is that right?
Yeah. That phrase is commonly associated with Caesar. Whether or not that's completely apocryphal is, extremely likely. I listened to the History of Rome podcast many, many years ago, right before I found What Spoilers. But he did an entire episode where he was just doing nothing but packing in all of the various phrases that we get from that particular period in time, because Augustus Caesar, Octavian did so much culture building and cultural rewriting that we have a lot of pictures of that. But yes, the dice are out of the cup is the actual phrase that gets associated with him. Editing Aradia here to say that the phrase is actually the die is cast. That's actually it. But it's like anything where you've got things about dice and generals is like hard not to see that as a Caesar reference, at least for me, having gotten obsessed with that for like a couple of weeks. So
that's very cool. It's also, as much as it ties her, I think, to the great generals, it also is just a nice reminder to tie her back to Emond's Field and to Matt and to their friendship, and that, like, they're all kind of low-key thinking about each other, right? Like,
yeah, she's thinking about Matt because Talmanes is there, because she's doing all this military stuff, and it's like, all right, brother, like...
Well, and if I had to pull some crazy shit like this, and I was from the Emond's Field 5, and I had to think of someone from my friend group to emulate, it would certainly be Matt in this situation. Like, what would Matt say and do? Because he'd probably get through it, right? Like, all right, toss the dice, let's go. And
then the very last, most important thing is she drops the novice book bombshell right in the second to last paragraph of the chapter is, oh, and while I have everyone's attention and all of the social credit and clout, the novice book is open to everyone, every woman of every age, of every station, right here, right now. Open.
And she didn't even tell Swan about this. She just was like, fuck it. I'm dropping this.
Yeah. That was an impulsive move on her part that turns out to have been a very good intuition, because she is a great general who follows her intuitions.
It is an excellent plan, and one that I wholeheartedly support. And I like, and we'll see the fallout of it in just a second, but I like the way that they do end the chapter on a little bit of a mic drop with, you know, she got halfway there. The first part wasn't as bad as she thought it was going to be, but the other half remains. And as first-time readers, it's like, excuse me? Like, what is the plan? What are we trying to accomplish? Other than the obvious intent to travel out of here to Tarvalin, right? Is the, like, that's all the, when I first read this, I was like, this is cool. So, yeah, I get it. You get, like, fed and everyone leaves you alone for the next month, and then you're going to go attack the tower. But also, what do you mean the other half of this plan? So yeah. I like that little mic drop.
And the other half of the plan is the declaration of war.
Right.
Which, it's funny because they're marching on the tower. Like, I get that the declaration of war is what gives her power over everything, right? And ultimately that trickles down to being power over Rand. I think that's kind of what I was thinking of in the beginning, right? It's like how to handle the dragon. It's like how to handle the war. Like, he ends up being part of it.
She renegotiates.
Oh, am I misremembering two negotiations into one? Okay.
Yeah, there's a second where she says, you know, she's handling the war and it's you know, all this stuff is going on, and she's like, you know, you're right, it's gotten too big. I should really give this back to the Hall. It's much more paperworky. The Hall should be doing that. You can have it, but in exchange, I want to deal with kings. I should be, you know, on a one-on-one meeting. I should be able to deal with all kings exclusively. And they're like, sure, yeah, no problem, as long as we can do the war. And then the one woman's like, I think it's Tenobia or whatever. I don't know, who is it?
No, not Tenobia. Definitely not Tenobia. It's the gray that knows everything.
Oh.
Yeah, the gray who knows all the rules.
Tamika?
Something like that.
That's very close. That's very close.
Takima.
Yes. Nice.
He says, you fools, don't you know what you've done? He's a king, you know, and everyone's like, oh, yeah. So it's like that second, it's like she gets the both, oh my God, the war means the Amyrlin gets all control of everything, and they get that first forehead slapping moment where you have everyone in the rooms, you know, do that at the same time. And then like you get the second one when they give her access to the Dragon Reborn. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. That's what I was conflating those two scenes, and I was like, but somehow that's how this ends. That's like where we're going though somehow. So, but that's not part of her plan necessarily. Right now, she just needs to get control over everything. And
it's very much Sanderson writing sort of a repeat scene. It's very much an echo of the scene that Jordan wrote.
Yeah. she recycles that move for her next big plan. Right now, she's not focused on Rand, but once she gets the tower and she can focus on Rand, she's like, well, they're dumb enough to fall for the same trick twice, right? And they completely are. And it's awesome. So it's easy to conflagrate the two because it's literally her just doing the same move over again because Sanderson thought it was a cool move and wanted to repeat it. That would be my belief.
That makes sense. And it's because they're already on their way to the tower. Like, they haven't declared war, but that's already the plan to go there, right? Like, they're figuring out how to fly on the way down the cliff face. Yeah. Like, and it's such a brilliant plan. Like, the more that we talk about it, the more crystallized it becomes. And it's like, yeah, totally. Everyone would agree because you're already doing that. You just don't have the formal declaration. But obviously you are going to stage a siege on Elida and the tower. This changes nothing about their plans and everything about the politics around how they're executed. Right. So, of course, everyone doesn't even think twice. They're like, yeah, no shit. We're totally going to war. I vote yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like, we're doing that anyway.
But and I think America, again, I have to come back to Jordan and Vietnam because that was not a war. That was an armed conflict. And so I think there might be a certain amount of just like,
well spotted.
Come on, guys, we're going to war. Let's fucking declare war. Right. This armed conflict bullshit is just stupid.
Yeah, no, that's a good catch on the Jordan connection there with, we got to find Vietnam connections because it bears fruit when you do that.
Yeah. All of them are there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's obvious it was a lived experience for him. It's obvious that it influences writing in ways that...
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good to see the political side. That's not just the horrors of war part. It's also like he's got an astute mind for politics, as is evidenced by the fact that like a third of this book or a third of the series is politics. He's got a mind for it. So it makes sense that he's commenting on Vietnam from a political perspective as well as from a human horrors of war perspective.
Yeah, especially with how political that war was. I mean, more so than anything that preceded it because it was so unwarranted, right? Like you didn't have the same kind of discourse around like a World War II.
And speaking of raining random destruction on people in a forest with no visibility of who's in there, right? I mean, the parallels between Rand's experience at the end of this book in Vietnam and Napalm are basically, hand in hand. I'll talk about that more when we get there, but it's like, okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm excited for you guys to get there. That's some shit at the end of this.
I love the smell of sardine in the morning.
Yeah, really the start of Rand's, like, if I see you, you're dead sort of approach to life. Egwene stood and she could hear the rustle of the sitters sitting behind her. It is agreed then, we must all depart soon if we're to return to our own beds before dark, but we should spare a few moments. Getting to know one another a little better now might avoid misunderstandings later, and talk might give a chance to reach Talmanis. Oh, one thing you should all be aware of. The novice book is now open to any woman, whatever her age, if she tests true. Arethel blinked. Swan did not, yet Egwene thought she heard a faint grunt. This was not part of what they had discussed, but there would never be a better time. Come, I'm sure you would all like to speak with the sitters. Let formality go. Without waiting for Sheriam to offer a hand, she stepped down. She almost felt like laughing. Last night, she'd been afraid she might never reach her goal, but she was halfway there, almost halfway, and it had not been nearly as difficult as she'd feared. Of course, the other half remained.
Chapter 18. A peculiar calling, and our symbol is the dice. For a moment after Egwene descended, no one else moved, and then the Andorans and the Murandians headed for the sitters, almost as one. Apparently, a girl Amerlin, a girl puppet and figurehead, held no interest, not with ageless faces in front of them that at least said they were actually speaking to Aes Sedai. 2 or 3 lords and ladies clustered around each sitter, some thrusting their chins demandingly, others diffidently bending their necks, yet every one insistent on being heard. The sharp breeze whisked away the mist of their breath and fluttered cloaks forgotten in the importance of asking their questions. Sheriam was buttonholed, too, by red-faced Lord Donal, who blustered and jerked bows by turns. Egwene pulled Sheriam away from the narrow-eyed man. Find out discreetly all you can about these sisters and tower guards in Andor. she whispered hastily. As soon as she released the woman, Donal reclaimed her. Shiriam actually looked put upon, but her frown disappeared quickly. Donal blinked uneasily as she began questioning him.
To which I wrote in the margins, lols.
It's why you're like, oh, Shiriam really could be an effective keeper if she just did that, right? Like, Egwene can give her purpose and goals and motivation to, like, really be effective. And it's a real shame that, like, she's Darkfriend.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, it's, like, good that she doesn't. But also, yeah, it is strange because they have this unexplored dynamic of having Swan, who is not the keeper, but also who is, like, objectively more important and trusted by Egwene than Shiriam is as the keeper. So it's this weird dynamic that's new to all of the Aes Sedai and plus Darkfriend. But yeah, it's an awkward sort of social and professional situation between the three of them.
Yeah. There's a lot of layers between the three of them.
I love Suwan's little comment here, Shen Chunla. It's like, basically, don't fuck up. Right? Because like,
don't screw the pooch.
Yeah.
Say don't screw the pooch in like their
that's
like
what she
inner
said.
like Amerlin speak.
Yeah. It's like, it's going well so far. Don't fuck it up, because like we know, because we saw her earlier give her sort of the breakdown of like, you could be this or you could be that one, but don't be this one, you know? And so that's just a little reminder.
Yeah, I like later Egwene thinks like, I'm not going to be a carbon copy of another of another Amerlin. I am going to be myself and I'm going to make my own mistakes. But yeah, at this point in her arc, she's still very much just learning all of the lessons of prior Amerlin. She's not evolved enough to make her own mistakes yet.
You know, I wonder if Suwan, one of the reasons she knows all this stuff is because she, as such a young Amerlin, did a lot of the studying of previous Amerlins to try and figure out who she wanted to be. And that perhaps one of her sins was never deciding to be her own Amerlin, but only being an amalgamation of the ones she wanted to be.
I would agree, and I would add that she also had the additional motivation of trying to uncover the Black Aja within the tower and wanting to understand why there was such a high turnover rate of Amerlins for such a long time, right? Like that was an element to it. So I think she's got like a lot of reasons to research the Amerlins, especially the young ones, which I think Shen Chunla was like one of the youngest Amerlins ever at the time, I think.
That rings a bell. But yeah, Seth, I like your point because Swan also has the pressure of like finding the Dragon Reborn. Like she's in this much more ambiguous place with respect to the apocalypse than Egwene is. Like Egwene knows she's living in the indrawn breath before the end times. Like she knows that in a way that Swan is like, it's like the 20 years build up before that moment. It's different.
Right.
So she doesn't feel like she has the ability to choose her own path at all. She has to simply be an amalgamation of the best parts of all the Amerlins. I think she kind of makes that choice on purpose, but it's also like part of her downfall. I think you're really right about that. The fact that she is only an amalgamation means that she missteps because all of those Amerlins made mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
And also just like when you're trying to be what you think somebody else is rather than like being yourself, like that's, I think, one of the reasons why she was such a hard ass all the time is it's like, oh, I can't even slip up once instead of being herself. And probably someone that everybody would have liked more if she wasn't just such a like pain in the ass, can't mess up, young Amerlin, right? Like the hard assness, I think, is a reaction to, in a lot of ways, the same way that Egwene is like, I cannot give an inch with these sitters. I have to be a badass because otherwise I'm going to fucking
get deposed, be still,
lose all my power.
Any of the above.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
There's no examples of that in recent memory for Egwene to look at or anything, though, right?
No, not at all. not sitting with her right next to her. Yeah, I think that's right about Swan, and I think that her priority was never to be liked or to be even necessarily a good Amerlin beyond what it took to not be deposed, which obviously fail. But yeah, the plan was always around the Dragon Reborn. So I don't feel like she ever was like, I think that's what we kind of see in A New Spring a lot. She was never like, yeah, I want to be Amerlin and this is my goal. The way that Egwene is, right? Egwene is like, I want to be the Amerlin seat. And as such, I will have X impact on Tarmangaiden.
In a lot of ways, Suwan wanted to be the opposite of the Amerlin. She wanted to go out and see the world. That was always her goal. She never wanted to be stuck in the tower. That's like her worst nightmare. She just got stuck with it because Moraine took the wheel. I was always a little confused about why Suwan didn't, do more I guess Moraine had to leave or else she would have been queen. Is the issue.
And Swan sees the strategic value of being close to the center of the intelligence network that is the Blue Aja for the sake of their mission. She's like, well, Moraine can't stay here because she'll be crowned queen. I don't have that problem as a fisherman's daughter, so I can be the one to stay close to Aes Sedai and get their info. But it's all in names of the mission. It's all in the name of finding the Dragon Reborn. We don't get to see her show up as Aes Sedai as herself, really, until she gets to be Egwene's mentor. That's when she actually gets to just be her own self. It's kind of the same freedom that Morghese finds, honestly. Like when they get taken out of power and they get to choose their own path, they still get to respond to the apocalypse, right? Like everyone has a role to play in the apocalypse.
They get to respond to the apocalypse, yes.
Whether it's dying or something else.
You know, leading armies or being in an army. Like either way, you need to be part of this.
Or being killed by an army.
I agree. And I think she gets her chance now that she's going to be able to participate in the apocalypse. And also, like, everything's turning, you know what I mean? Like, Rand is doing his thing. Like, that's no longer her responsibility. And so now she gets to identify, I think, a lot more closely with what it means to be Aes Sedai for her and do a lot of the conversation around the oaths. And no, I do care about being Aes Sedai. And this is what being Amyrlin means and getting to embrace that beyond the quest for the dragon, which she didn't really get to do as Amyrlin. So she's, Swan's arc is cool. Swan is cool.
Swan's super cool. And she gives us an absolute slurry of fish insults. It's so amazing.
Oh my God, it's like a whole paragraph.
The best.
It's unbelievable. She's like belligerent. It's like she doesn't know any other way to like express herself when she's this flustered. And it's just like a full stacked paragraph of fish references.
Yeah.
I feel like at that point, Jordan was like, somebody bet him something that he like couldn't put so many fish references or like, I feel like that's a challenge from Jordan.
Hold my fish.
Right. She is apoplectic in this paragraph. Like she is losing her shit and it's hilarious.
And what in particular is making her apoplectic?
She didn't know about opening the novice books.
Yeah.
Egwene didn't tell her, and she's like,
that was an instant gotcha.
Yeah.
Like we make all these plans together and you just spring that out of nowhere?
Yeah, she doesn't tell her.
Yeah, so she's swearing, but in Swan's fashion, so it's fish.
Okay, so here's my confusion around that, right? So in the beginning of this chapter, she was talking about how they would never want to go to the old way of recruiting because this way is working so well. So I thought the novice book was already open. Or is it just that they're taking older women? Or is it that...
It's an age thing. It's the age thing.
It's just the age thing.
Yeah, I misspoke earlier when I said from any station in life. That's not correct. It's only the age thing that Egwene is changing because the novice book has always been open to any woman who tests true within an extremely narrow age range that massively reduces their ability to actually recruit.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure what Egwene is doing differently now. Like what was different in Saladar, though?
That's what I'm asking. Yeah, I don't understand. Like,
right? Yeah, because they hadn't opened it up to all ages yet in Saladar that I recall. I'm wondering if it was just more approachable, if the approach of just like, if you guys want to come get tested, just like, let me know. It's not a big deal. Just like come over and say hi. Maybe that was.
It's like a traveling clinic where you can go and like get a bunch of care, right? Like it's come way closer to home. So it's easier to get tested.
Maybe it's just that they're recruiting at all. Because instead of just sitting in their literal ivory tower being like, well, if you think like y'all think you're good enough, you think you got what it takes, come let me know. Like they're actually like going through the countryside, like speaking to people. I mean, look at what happens when they spend like 30 seconds anywhere near Emmons Field and like they come back with like Alana and
Varen.
That's right. And then they meet up with Catswain, right?
Yeah. And then there's also the like bringing of soldiers to armies element of it. Like the last battle needs a lot of channelers. So the second that there's an opportunity, all of a sudden it turns out there's channelers in the works. It's like all the grain, right, that Rand finds at the end with his, world bending luck where, you only opened all the bad sacks. Like the rest of it's fine. It's that kind of thing where it's like, you need channelers now. So now there's a bunch of channelers for you to get. But yeah, I do think that if they'd opened the book sooner, if they'd had recruitment parties out sooner, if they'd been, more approachable, like you're saying, they would have had the tower full to bursting for the last several centuries. No problem.
So here's my question. Which Aja should be out recruiting?
Yeah.
The blue.
You think that's the blue, or do you think it should be a new Aja?
The blue and the red, I think, are the two logical ones to be out recruiting. Honestly, all of them. They should all be out in the world doing their thing, and they should each have a stack of pamphlets and like at least a week's worth of training on how to sales pitch people.
Like a job fair.
Hi, how are you? Can I interest you in the White Tower? We're here for a cause. We're trying to save the world from the Dark One. Really, it's a low monthly fee. Will really help. The White Tower needs gold to keep their spies paid. And so if you could just sign on the line and include your email address.
I'm a blue. We're really invested in causes. And if you have any questions, you can always here's my number. No, not my number. Here's my email. Here's my Pinterest tag. Yeah.
Or alternatively, we could go with, hey, so I know
God.
your village is pretty poor, but if you join up, we will totally pay for college, and there'll be no danger to your life in the White Tower whatsoever.
Oh, just come with us. Just do a tour of duty with us. Sorry, did I say that? Terms of service with us. Yeah.
Oh my God. I could totally see it though. It's just like a college fair, and whichever Aja's giving out like the best candy and shit. It's like people are going to be like lining up behind the Reds because they had all the best, free pizza or something. And
Totally.
So it's what they do in the Black Tower. Yes. And that
Very
quickly fills up. So it definitely works.
The traveling recruiting helps quite a bit.
Well, and traveling with a capital T.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Like traveling with a capital T is very helpful to recruiting. That's true.
Right. Lowercase t would have helped a lot in the preceding centuries. Capital T traveling allows you to do it in a matter of months rather than years or centuries.
Well, and lowercase t appears to have been helping the Rebel Tower, right?
Yeah.
Like the little tower's not big T traveling right now as a group. So they're picking up a bunch of people, but yeah, no surprise at all that everybody comes to talk to them. And I think or am I jumping ahead too far where everyone comes to talk about the novice book?
Right. So, Egwene says her thing about Swan, I think I should tell Lord Bryn you're in love with him. And we get that whole awkward conversation, which is, a pretty sick burn.
Burn.
Your Aes Sedai, Suan, try to maintain at least a little dignity. Coming from this upstart little 18-year-old.
Oh my God.
And meanwhile, Susan's like, but damn it, she's right.
She's literally, is she still a teenager or is she 20 at this point?
No, she's a teenager. Rand is
she's
20.
literally a teenager, and she's telling an Aes Sedai twice her age to have some decorum around having a crush, and it's amazing.
Well, and I love that she interrupts Swan's apoplectic rant, right? Like Swan's losing her shit, and she's like, I swear to God, if you think you're gonna fish or whatever out of it, and Egwene's like, Swan, and just throws this out there at her out of nowhere, and it's shuts her up so fast, and it's just absolutely hilarious. She doesn't know what to do, and Swan's she's not one of the super unnaturally old Aes Sedai. She and Moiraine are around the same age.
Yeah, she's in her 40s,
right?
Yeah,
she's right, yeah, but damn, still,
Can you imagine telling your mom off like that?
No.
Which is basically the difference between them, particularly given their prior relationship with Swan as literal Amerlin.
So she sends Swan off in a fluster under threat of busting her crush to go do something productive with herself.
Yes. And now it's Talmanis. Now it's Talmanis' time.
Now it's Talmanis. And she's so she's trying so hard to not let anyone see that she's talking to Talmanis. But also this is the only opportunity that she has to talk to Talmanis. So she's in a real catch-22.
In front of hundreds of people.
Yeah. She's just be casual. Just be casual. It's Egwene, nothing you do is casual.
Yeah. And she needs to have this conversation.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
No, everyone's looking at you. And did you not catch the 10 pages we had in the prior chapter about everyone's outfit? I'm no, everyone is looking.
Right. Yeah, totally. So it's incredibly obvious, but it's an important conversation for them to have anyway. And so Talmanis starts out saying, you've changed a border. Look at how the Murandians and Andorans are interacting. The border will be in a different spot than it was because of you being here. Congratulations. And Egwene's wow, I didn't notice that before. But, she's getting up to speed on how these politics work. But it's, for someone so politically savvy, it has to be explained. I guess that's because we're not as politically savvy as Egwene, so we need it explained.
Yeah,
it's exposition.
Explainers.
That's fair.
One thing I do want to point out, there's a point where she's looking at a pretty black-haired serving man who could not hide his neatly turned calves. And I was like, is that Jordan attempting to sort of make up for Matt's looking at girls' breasts all the time? Is that his sort of like equivalency? Like looking at well-turned calves and not being able to hide it?
I mean, if she's going to be our foils for Rand and Matt in her own way, in different ways, yeah. That is her. She's looking at calves, and probably more than just his calves, probably also his glutes.
Mm-hmm. Unmentioned by Jordan, unfortunately.
Yes. But, good calves tend to go with good glutes. So
nobody's glutes are getting a lot of attention. I don't get the feeling that Jordan was like an ass man, to be honest. Like, it's not a lot of discussion.
He mentions hips occasionally, but it's really infrequent.
And like, as it relates to childbearing, probably. Oh my God. But that's funny. Yeah, I didn't even notice that. Well, and you know what? If anybody in this group is going to be like ogling a dude, I honestly would expect it to be Egwene, frankly. That tracks to me.
That's fair. She is the youngest in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. And the most like starry-eyed. I mean, I know that Nynaeve right after they get married is very, like, oh goodness, like she's all flustered about land for a hot minute when she loses her virginity. But, other than that, yeah, Elaine's pretty bad. You know what? They're all pretty bad as I'm going through it. Even Min, they're actually all pretty bad. But it tracks for me that any of the girls would be thinking like this, actually. Yeah. They are all offenders of this.
So, Tomanis. So only Halima and Swan are watching this conversation. Interesting that we're pairing Halima
two people
with
who know
Swan,
where the power is.
The people who are the closest to the Amarlin physically and intellectually, the people who are most actively trying to control her handlers, so to speak, are the ones paying the most attention to her being, don't be suspicious. Her handlers are still watching.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also just dark friend alert. It's just so obvious.
Mm-hmm. And then she says this really indirect thing to Talmanas and has this thought like, Light, I'm so anxious. I'm being super direct. And every time I get to that line, I'm like, Egwene, you're so deep in the game. That was not direct. That really, I guess it was direct for a Kyrianan, but like, not for me. Slow down, girl. Slow down.
And then I have Talmanis jumping in to say, like, to ask about Matt, because he's just the most loyal buddy. And he's just like, did you know you were going to do this when you sent Matt south? Will you tell me where he is at least? Mm-hmm. Like, what? Because he's really feeling the Taviran tugging, and he's like owning that. He's like, it is Taviran tugging right now. I'm like jonesing for some Taviran satisfaction. Where's Matt? And obviously she's not just going to come out and tell him. Although she does say, I think he knows that Matt's like in Abu Dar or headed that way-ish, but doesn't know exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she knows he's there.
Well, she does, but does Talmanis?
No, Talmanis doesn't know.
Okay.
One thing that's interesting here is she sort of implies that she's like, Talmanis, I don't want to tell you because, men gossip and I don't want you. And he's like, So I got all my information from a serving woman who was gossiping.
I know. Such a good such a good diss.
Love Talmanis' dry humor there. He lets her rant about men. He's like, not all men gossip. And she's like, sure, whatever. And he's like, yeah, so I got my information from a woman who was gossiping. And it worked so well.
And Egwene's just like, ugh, men are so annoying. It's like, oh, Egwene, you're so stubborn.
I think she even brings it back up again later, doesn't she? Isn't she like, well, he probably won't gossip. Some men don't do it. Some men don't. It's going to be okay.
Right. But she still blames him for the woman gossiping. Oh, he inveigled her. And she's like, no, it's just that you're judgy. And she's thinking about the oaths the whole time because this is so inconvenient. And it would be so expedient if she could lie. And she's looking at Swan and looking at Talmanis and just having all of that. Like, here's the rubber meets the road. Walk the talk. You need to actually follow through with this, or else you are a poser and deserve all of the imposter syndrome. And she does tell him. She does end up telling Talmanis he was in Abu Dar last, I heard.
Yes.
She decides that she owes him that and can't get out of it with her oaths. So she's going to live by the oaths. She really does need to tell him.
And then she does sort of this little like wishy, but he must be hurrying north as fast as he can, right? Like that's that very much her, like she knows he's not doing that. She knows that he's left in Abu Dar, like.
Well, does she though? Has she been talking to the girls in Tel Aranrayad? Does she know that he didn't make it out with them?
There is a quote. Let me pull it up.
That's because that's what I wasn't sure of. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if she thinks that he is like with them, having gone through the exploding gateway and on their way into Andor. I wouldn't be surprised if she believed that.
She knows that he got left behind when they fled.
Yeah, because she's talked to them since they used the Bowl of the Winds. She knows what's up. Yeah,
absolutely. But so now she has no way of checking up on him, but she assumes that he's getting out of the city ASAP, like maybe a week later. She doesn't know about he was crushed by a wall and he's being nursed back to health in the Tarzan Palace and he's going to have that whole saga. Like she has no way of checking in on him.
Because Egwene and Elaine don't know that.
Exactly.
No, they have no idea. They think that he just stayed behind to get Oliver and then he's going to get out of there, right? That was the plan.
Yeah, so they're just waiting. They're just like, he's going to get here like any minute now. And that just persists for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah, he's totally fine.
Because he's mad.
Well, how do they think he's going to get out of there? I mean, now he can't travel.
They don't know that he got crushed by a wall. They don't know that his hip has pins set in it and he's in traction, you know?
Well, I guess I mean like quickly, right? Like how would they expect him to, or he can't travel by himself. So like, what's he going to do? Like he's going to like take the Alan Lucas Circus and walk his ass to Andor and like, damn, like that's everyone's assumption of what's going on. And then nobody is like, should we do something about that? Can we assist? Like, and I understand not wanting to go back to Abu Dar because they know that the Shan-Chen are there now and nobody who can channel is going to step foot. I get that. But also, damn, like they never, like they do Matt so dirty. They never even have a conversation. The girls where they're like, should we do something to like circle back? Is there someone we can send? Is there, later they have like whole delegations from the Black Tower who could go under very little threat to the Shan-Chen and they don't do that. I'm like, cool. Yeah, fuck Matt. Sure, guys.
They don't know where he is and he always gets himself in and out of trouble. It's whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Taviran, right? And then they can kind of brush it off. And it does work out. It works out pretty good, to be fair.
And they honestly are the least helpful people in Abu Dar right now, right? Like a bunch of female channelers coming to the rescue, not helpful.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like
they just make Matt do something stupid as a result.
No. If they had some Asha men with them, which they do later, but the trust situation there is never great. So I can see where it's never exactly convenient for anyone to prioritize that, but
it would have been nice if they talked about it. They still could have at least talked it through.
Yeah, like a throwaway line of like, too bad we can't do anything to help our friend would have been nice. But no, just we're cool. All right, whatever, guys.
Yeah. But Talmanis is kind of in reserve, right? He's got this feeling that's not urgent, but it's there. Like as soon as Matt leaves Abu Dar, Talmanis is going to be like, yep, time to go. Let's go meet him.
I want to read that quote really quick.
Oh, okay, cool.
Talmanis did not look at all surprised. I thought it might be so, he sighed. I have felt something for weeks now. Others in the band have too. Not urgent, but always there. As if he needed me. As if I should look south. Anyway. It can be peculiar following a Taviran. And Egwene's like, nope, don't believe you. I think you're full of shit.
And that's chapter title, real quick call out. Right? The peculiar calling. I wondered what that really was referring to, and it's referring to the Taviran pulling, but go on.
I just noticed that as you were reading it.
Yeah.
Finally clicked. Yep. Peculiar calling to the south because Taviran.
Because Taviran.
Which is immediately followed by Egwene being like, surely Taviran had to be present nearby at least to have any effect. And it's like, no.
He's not a radioactive rock, Egwene.
No. And then I like the line after that too. Matt was wrong about you needing rescue. You never had any intention of coming to me for help, did you? And she's like, fuck no. I'm the Umberland seat, bitch. Like she's not trying to.
He's the good friend who actually sees what's going on while the siblings fight. I really see Egwene and Matt as siblings that are constantly bickering but have each other's backs. And Talmanis is that friend who like knows what's really going on underneath all the banter and sparring.
Totally. He's very it reminds me a bit of Julian in that way.
Yeah.
These sort of side characters that are like, I'm paying attention, though. I understand what's up. Like, when Tom is maybe too much of a main character even to put in that category. But
it feels like Egwene should be able to figure out the non-locality of Taviranness because she's been in the place of dreams where it doesn't matter where you are, the dreams are close to each other. It's one of those things where like the non-locality of influence on the pattern is something Egwene is very familiar with, right? Like that's why her blind spot with Matt, I think, is one of the reasons a lot of people don't like her.
In her underestimation of him.
Yeah.
But again, this is why I say it's a sibling relationship, not a friend relationship.
Totally.
Yes. Yeah. You cannot acknowledge your siblings' accomplishments. You are not allowed to do that. Right? No. Like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I actually have a really good relationship with my sibling where that's not true. But I do realize that is a very common theme for a lot of people. I just happen to be one of the lucky ones.
I think, too, with like her underestimation of Matt in defense of Egwene, because I think that's correct. And I understand why a lot of people like why that's part of their issue with her. Right. Because I love Matt, too. Like, I also take issue with anyone second guessing Matt.
But usually when people tell me I don't like Egwene, I'm like, why? It's like, well, she's so mean to the boys. And this is that sort of attitude that I see, you know?
Well, yeah. And that's more like Nynaeve and Elaine are mean to Matt. But yes, she has an arrogant attitude about it that's like, I think it's more acknowledged by the general public within the books, like of the characters. Like her arrogance is more validated maybe than Nynaeve and Egwene's, whereas they come up against somebody like Brigitte and they're like, pull your head out of your ass. You said what to him? Like Egwene never gets that moment where anybody checks her on this. She just kind of runs with that arrogance. And I think in her defense, like part of what I like about Egwene is that she does have to have any monicum of power, to have anyone listen to her at all. She has to have an absurd amount of confidence in what she's saying and doing at all times. So she doesn't leave a lot of room to think critically beyond the critical thinking that she did to get to like where she is in any given moment that she's done with Swan and her planning. And she's doing a lot of that, obviously. But when it comes to this, it's like if she's going to go with something, she just has to go because she can't afford to second guess herself or her assumptions or her arrogance. She has to come in with that attitude to everything that she does for anyone to listen to her. And it sucks for Matt is he ends up being kind of on the butt end of that where she has to maintain this facade and it ends up with her kind of talking shit or underestimating him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's how you win at being Aes Sedai. But yeah, Matt definitely draws the short straw on the shrapnel from that for I mean, and he's a good friend, right? He's part of her background, but he really gets shafted in that process.
And we see her emulating him in the prior chapter.
Yeah.
With Time to Toss the Dice, right? Like the respect is there. The love is there. He's in her mind somewhere.
He can take the hit, so she throws him under the bus.
Yeah, I get why people don't like that about her.
Yeah, no.
A little bit. And he also, like, so much of what he does goes in opposition to, like, Aes Sedai conventional thinking, which she holds to a lot more than you would expect.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for someone in her position to do, right?
Swan's influence there.
Oh, big time.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even we saw that just with the oaths, where Egwene comes in and is like, these oaths are stupid. And Swan's like, no, here's the Aes Sedai thinking. And Egwene's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm. And then we see it play out in this chapter with being out on the ice and the oaths being the only thing that gets them to this point of being able to have like a diplomatic experience.
But yeah, Talmanes says you were never going to come see me or you're never going to run to me. And Egwene unbends enough to say it was nice to know you were there, even though correct. I was never planning on coming to you. It wasn't uncomfortable knowing you were there.
Nynaeve, on the other hand.
Right.
So there's a very real chance Nynaeve was going to run to them for help.
Yeah, for sure.
I think Nynaeve would have been out of here by now if she'd been with this group with the rebels. No chance.
Yeah, she was getting out one way or another. She found her way with the bull, but I think that if that hadn't gone, she was like a day away from being like, Uno, get me the fuck out of here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Somebody take me to Rand. That seems nicer.
Let's cleanse the source, please. That's got to be better. Yeah.
Which, of course, is where she'll spend the rest of the story, right? She's like, and I'm not coming back to that. Thank y'all. Like, no, I'm not going to be Aes Sedai, even though she is Aes Sedai, but she doesn't play in that sandbox for very long. Like she is for the rest of the story with Rand after this, right? I mean, she stepped
into that sandbox, took a shit all over it, and dominated and stepped out. Like that was
yeah, she really did. Show everybody up, and then all the yellows are all over her, and she's like, no, just kidding. I didn't want to know. I'm gonna go to Abrador now.
Yeah. And then Talmanes responds to Egwene's openness with a bit of openness in return, which is one of those, like, this is why you should share information. You know, this is the counter to Swan's constant secrecy, is getting information in return for information. And Talmanes explains his plan to stay and earn money and wait for Matt to need them more strongly. And that tactical discussion goes down between them, and that's most of what they talk about for this scene.
And that's the thing where he stays with King Roden, helps him for a while until he feels the pulling down south and heads south to meet Matt as Matt's coming up north. But basically right now he's waiting for Matt to heal. This is the Ta'Veren holding pattern of, like, don't go any further north. We need you to stay here so you can come south when you're needed.
Mm-hmm. Hang tight.
And his usefulness to her army has basically expired, right? So he's a little bit adrift at the moment in terms of, like, where he needs to be, and there's an opportunity waiting for him. It's like Ta'Veren, you know, there's just this perfect opportunity that allows him to keep his soldiers fit and fed and armed and recruiting while they wait for Matt, rather than starving their way across the countryside as Dragonsworn beset on every side by petty nobles. So that's very convenient for him, shall we say.
And probably fresh too, right? Like, yeah, they're not traveling. They're not, according to the plan, not going to fight, right? Which they don't end up doing. Because she's like, yo, but what if they betray you? What if this doesn't work? What if you have to fight for them? And he's like, Matt's going to find us. There is no chance in hell that they get ready for this before spring. It's never going to be a situation. It's fine. And it's a fun fake out from, what's this guy's name? Roden. To be like, yeah, no, like, we're going to make it look like we're going to fight you. But because he wants to gather his own army, right? That's his plan, is like for the band to sit on the outskirts.
He's kind of imitating what the Aes Sedai have done, really.
I was about to say that exact thing. I was to say, I don't think King Roden came up with this idea. I think he saw exactly what Egwene was doing and was like, oh yeah, I'll pay the band to do that for me too.
Yeah, easy peasy.
Like, I literally do think, I really do think
actually makes a lot of sense.
when she's like, oh, it sounds a lot like a plan Zuon would have come up with. I'm like, she did. It's your plan. He's stealing it.
You just filed the serial numbers off.
That's literally what you're doing right now. That's true. And she says, yeah, it's a remarkable plan and this is all going to be great. But then she says, I'm not going to leave a war in my wake. You are getting the hell out of there. If it comes to it and you have to leave without Matt to avoid fighting, you need to do that. I'm not going to leave you and have it turn into a big situation here. So she lays down the law with that, but she needn't worry because Matt does come north in time, I think. I don't think anything comes of any of this except for Talmanes stays, right? There's no...
Yeah, the plan goes exactly as he says it's going to.
Yeah.
Exactly as planned, right? There's no altercation, there's no war, there's no fight.
There's no twist. There's just no wrinkles, no bumps.
It's all off screen.
Because all plans last until the first arrow makes contact. And this plan revolves around arrows not making contact. And since there's no arrows, the plan goes according to plan. So that's how that works.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I like how this is where he asks her, are you sure that you're not Ta'Veren? And she says, I'm the Amerlin seat. That's quite enough for anyone.
I was going to say, that's
like,
Rafe.
Yep.
Rafe. Paging Rafe.
I know. Right?
It made you say, are you sure you're not Ta'Veren? I am the Amerlin seat, she replied. That is quite enough for anyone.
Mm-hmm. And this is why she crushes Missana's mind. It's because she sees being the Amerlin seat as being more influential on the world than being Ta'Veren. Like, that is a conviction she has in her bones now at this point. And then she goes through so much, and then Missana tries to undercut her confidence in who she is. And it's like, oh, no.
No, absolutely not. And this is why I love her. This is why she and Matt are my two favorites. And I can't put one above the other because they're so different. But because they have like nothing in common whatsoever. But that is what I like about Egwene. Like, that's her whole, like, she knows for damn sure who she is, if nothing else. And she is like ready to commit to a plan with confidence. And she fakes it until she makes it.
And does she make it?
And does she make it? Yeah, exactly. Like, I love her. I really do. Even if she's obnoxious sometimes, she has to be to get where she is.
Yeah, totally.
So if I had to pair the men and the woman, I would definitely pair Rand and Egwene as parallels. Matt and Nynaeve as the...
Definitely.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Foils.
Wow, you both went with a word that was not what I was thinking of. No.
Wow. Was it not? Because that's the technical term for what they are.
Hypocrite. They're both hypocrites.
Yeah.
They're both huge hypocrites.
Oh, yeah, no, they're both huge hypocrites. That's correct. Yes, they are huge hypocrites.
And then I kind of have to pair Perrin and Aviendha.
Oh, I can see that.
Like the struggle with fighting in the way of the leaf,
yeah,
the whole
okay.
like warrior, but also from peace, the sort of antisocial, on your own, in your own head, brooding type personality.
Very single-minded loyalty.
Yeah.
They both really have that. I mean, it's very much an Aiel trait, but Aviendha goes there really hard. Yeah, I can see that.
Yes.
They're both dreamers.
I can see that too. I can also see. Well, I was going to say Perrin and Egwene for that reason.
Yeah.
It's just a weave. That is one of my favorite interactions in the entire story.
It makes me want more interactions between the Emond's Field 5 after they get powerful, right?
Ah, yes.
Yeah, like just in general,
please.
like give me more of that. And maybe that's an opportunity for Rafe, right? I'm like, maybe, because I didn't argue about some of the Egwene Perrin stuff. I was like, good, lay that up. I like them together. Like there should be more of them together.
I mean, you can go back to me in that section of Eye of the World being like, I ship them. Like, I think even way back then in the podcast, like they were a better couple, I think, than some of the other couples.
Still a better love story than Twilight.
You know who else is a better couple than the other couples is Elaine and Matt. Elaine and Matt would have been where it was at. Like sometimes they have a fun parallel. I think a lot of the characters kind of weave in and out of who they're paralleling in a given moment. Like definitely Egwene and Rand for all the obvious reasons, but like also Egwene and Perrin.
Well, and one of the things I really, really like about this story is Jordan doesn't pair up any of the Emond's Field 5 with each other.
Romantically, you mean?
Yeah.
No, he doesn't.
Like, there's you expect, like, oh, well, maybe, like, well, I guess Nynaeve, but I guess, like, Elaine, if you include Elaine in that.
She's not an Emond's Field 5.
Yeah. The core crew.
The core crew, though. We can include Min, the core crew.
Min, the three women plus the Emond's Field 5. Yeah.
Min, Aviendha. Yeah, the three women plus the Emond's. Oh, God help us. Yes, that's correct. and plus the love interests. Yeah, I would have preferred Elaine and Matt and Egwene and anyone else.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Right? Like Egwene, I'm like, you take your pick, girl. Just anything but what you end up doing.
With the unspoken, the name we have not muttered because it's not worth it.
No.
Yeah.
There's no point. We don't have to go there. We all know how we all feel about it. But the only one who I wouldn't have paired romantically with anybody else is like Nynaeve, right? Like that's a done deal.
Yeah, that's the one that nobody's going to argue with ever. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Back to the chapter. Egwene gets compliments suitable for her age, perhaps, but not her station. Very insulting. She's continuing to be talked to as a child rather than as an Amerlin. But she gets the satisfaction of having basically every single woman in the entire tent ask about her proclamation. So she knows that seed has planted and taken root real fast. And that's a nice little small victory for her to have inside all of the anxiety of everything else.
And Jeanette, one of the Murandian nobles, becomes an Aes Sedai and ends up having a talent for Nynaeve's form of healing.
Really? Mm-hmm. I did not think to look up all those names. Oh.
Good catch.
Wow.
I just wrote name salad.
Wowzer. Oh, good catch. Good catch.
Yeah, damn. That's cool. So my question about this is like, what's going on here? Because we're not talking about all these women knowing that they could potentially channel. This is like...
No, but wanting to. It's that secret desire, but it would be so huge of a trip to go to the tower. Yeah. It'd be very embarrassing, blah, blah, blah. But the opportunity is right here, and the Aes Sedai are within arm's reach.
What if they never got tested before?
And your age doesn't matter.
And your age doesn't matter. Then that secret desire to see if you could has to start to flower just a little bit.
It'd be like finding out that Hogwarts was real after you were already over school age, but also like never felt like you could be and you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like, wait, hang on, but I could still come? Like, hang on.
I feel like in our modern age, it's like being like, hey, we're looking for a movie star. Any age, don't have to have acting experience. Right? And it's like, wait, I could be a movie star?
Right.
Yeah, you want to see if I
Any old
can. You want to see if
asshole,
I can act.
see what's up?
You know, and
Come on,
like,
let me know. Yeah.
not that acting is like channeling, but because it's
Fame.
you know,
Fame
but
is like
there's a
channeling,
certain
yes.
amount of like,
No, but-
fame.
I mean, when they cast in Gone with the Wind, when they cast Scarlett O'Hara, right, it looked a lot like that.
Mm-hmm.
When they cast Harry Potter, it looked just like that, right? It was like, are you a kid who you believe you look like
Right,
Harry Potter?
right.
Please come and see if you have any talent. None of them did, was the outcome, unfortunately.
That's mean. That's real mean.
It's so true, though.
They learned.
so
They got
bad.
better. I got better.
Oh, so everybody
Yeah,
comes and wants to join up is where we left that off, right? Everybody's stoked, and that's very rewarding for Egwene, and she kind of comes off feeling good.
Yeah, even a woman from the Aes Sedai camp wants to potentially, get tested. She's interested, and then we get to the discouraging part of the meeting. So she has this moment of encouragement with the small plan, but then she moves on to what's more discouraging, which is basically that everyone is at hair trigger readiness to go to violence, and she's trying to balance it all out, and it could still all devolve to violence very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And do we have anything before this comment about the Lion Throne?
No, that is the next thing I have.
Yeah. The only thing I wanted to say is Talmanis picked out the political stuff. Oh, we already talked about that. So Egwene missed the fact that Murandians were deferring to the Andorans.
Oh, yeah. We did cover that. Yes.
Yeah, we covered that. That's right. Okay, sorry. I just...
Yes, she notices it when they
yeah.
break away too. It does come back that we didn't mention that she's like, oh, Talmanis knows what he's talking about. They are all sucking up to the Andorans because Egwene has changed the border, right? Is the whole thing. It's like, oh shit.
Yeah, he gives her that information to allow her to then see it. So that way it's like, no, that is what's happening. This interaction makes sense now in a different way. That is important.
Yeah, and then she spots it.
But yeah, then she tries to make political small talk, just like, oh, so you definitely support Elaine, right? And Pelivar's like, meh.
She has the right to make a claim. And she's like, oh, shit. Her eyes widen and she steps back. She's like, oh, just faux pas there. She had no idea that this was as contentious as it's about to be and has no idea of the rumors that are swirling around in Andor. And of course, that sets us up for a couple chapters down the line after this. The last of her plan is into Andor, right? Isn't that the next chapter? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a lot like how Elaine stumbles into realizing that her mother is set against Aes Sedai. She's like, oh, yeah, my mother totally supports Aes Sedai. And then she learns, like, no, you're out of the loop. Your information's not up to date. Your mother is actively feuding with Aes Sedai. It's kind of the same thing here. Egwene assumes one thing, and it's like, oh, you need an update on the state of affairs. And that's going to come around to slog us down at some point in the future.
Indeed. Good use of that verb. Yeah, they really, nobody was really paying enough attention to Andor, huh? Like, for as much attention as everybody was paying, like, Rand spends a lot of time there in the last couple of books, like when Elaine's been otherwise occupied in Abu Jar, but, like, he just didn't know what the shit he was doing, did he, huh? Like, nobody who knew what was going on to, like, keep this on an even keel where she could come back and people would be, like, stoked about it and not have all of this drama. Nobody was able to keep Andor in that kind of condition for them.
No, they're just proud and we'll figure it out. And oh, look, now it's a mess.
Yeah. Which is kind of how the last battle goes too, huh?
Whoops.
It's fine, right? Oh, shit, we lost it. Fuck.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Whoopsie.
Mother, Swan murmured at her elbow. We must leave if you want to be sure of reaching the camp before sunset. She managed to put considerable urgency into those quiet words. The sun had passed its peak. This is no weather to be in the open at nightfall, Pelivar said hurriedly. If you will excuse me, I must make ready to leave. Shoving his cup onto the tray of a passing servant, he hesitated before halfway making a leg and stalked off with the air of a man who had wriggled free of a trap. Egwene wanted to grind her teeth with frustration. What did the men think of their agreement? If it could be called that, the way she had forced it on them. Erethel and Aemlyn had more power and influence than most of the men, yet it was Pelavar and Kulhan and the like who rode with the soldiers. They could still make this flare up in her face like a barrel of lamp oil. "Find Shiriam," she growled, "and tell her to get everyone mounted now, no matter what it takes." She could not give the sitters a night to think about what had happened today, to plan and plot. They had to be back in camp before the sun went down. We did it. We got through our 2 chapters. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for joining us for this.
Thank you guys for having me and having me back. This was super, super fun. Thank you guys.
Of course. Yeah, no, it was our pleasure. Thank you. You had a lot of great things to say, and it was really enjoyable to have you on, actually. Really appreciated it.
Thanks. I will come back anytime. If you guys want somebody, hit me up. I'm like, let me know if you want someone to come in and talk about Pavara when the time comes.
Oh, yes.
So be there for that. That's such a cool chapter.
Yeah.
It's a lot of Pavara stuff coming up, especially in later books.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, they're my favorite.
So yeah, anything else to say about that chapter?
She cannot give the sitters a night to think about what had happened today. She has to get them back and get them to declare war before they go to sleep.
So they do that before sleeping. They do that, like they sit right.
No, yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, nobody's allowed to have any time to think about any of this from the word go. Like, I think from the second that everybody found out that the Andorans and Murandians were there, she just had to move. There was and just keep everybody guessing. And that way it's all part of like having Romaine not sure.
I think it was even before that. When she says we're staying here for a day or two, because then it becomes inevitable that they're going to find out about the Andorans and the Murandians. So that sort of we're staying here for a day or two is the point where she says it's time to toss the dice. Like, this is where it's really starting.
Right. So yeah, this is such a sequence I've never managed to follow before. Like the speed at which it happens is an element of why I've never been able to follow the sequence before. It happens so fast.
In the name of Aes Sedai name salad.
It does.
Oh yeah. And noble name salad from 2 countries. Oh.
Honestly, it was mostly noble name salad. Yeah, it was like not too bad with the Aes Sedai, which is nice because the nobles didn't really end up ever doing anything, so I didn't have to worry too much about the name salad. Was the Aes Sedai might come back. These guys, not so much.
Yeah. But yeah, Egwene has now, the dice are rolling across the table. They're out of the cup. They're spinning. They have yet to land fully, but there's some of the dice have landed, like maybe but not all of them.
One of the dice has, yeah. Like, she can see some of them. Like, half of them are landed.
She's like, I got a 6 on one. I just got to get a 6 on the other. And yeah, it's so yeah, we're gonna. What our next chapter is her making the hall do the. Yep. All right,
and we're doing that with Morgan from Podcast of the Dragon.
Oh, right. Oh, Morgan's gonna school us.
If you don't know who Morgan is, shame on you, but Podcast of the Dragon is an amazingly detailed breakdown, extremely well produced.
Topical literary analysis.
Yeah, topical literary analysis, and she has gotten so good. It was good when it started. It is amazing now. You know, the improvement has been drastic, and it's really high quality.
Yeah, Morgan's brilliant and has really, really useful things to say. And yeah, it doesn't go in a linear fashion. Right. She goes topically. No. She goes all over the place. She's done Varan deep dive, Rand deep dive.
But it's also full spoilers.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. I have heard Podcast of the Dragon, but not in a hot minute. I should go revisit that pod because I like those kind of deep dives that are like, Seth, you guys were doing those for a while.
It's more on Patreon than
they ran on the Forsaken and the Patreon stuff. Yeah, totally. That's so cool. So that I will definitely have to check that out to hear some of the more recent ones. And I can't wait to hear your guys' discussion of chapter 19 because seeing all of this come to its crescendo and finally as readers getting to know what her plan is and again how mundane, it seems. Of course, we're going to war with Elida. Like, where have you been for the last like 3 books? But then it's like, oh, snap. Okay. So it's very cool. I'm excited to hear you guys have that conversation for next week for sure.
Me too.
Yeah.
Because Morgan's the kind of person that doesn't have to do a podcast to figure this all out. She's known all this the first time she read it and figured it out right away. And, you know, like
that might be exaggerating
I might be exaggerating a little bit, but oh my God, I am over and over and over again impressed by her intelligence and like her ability to take what is in the books, break it down into the events that actually happened, and then apply them in a literary and character-driven way.
Yeah, what Wheel takes is for hot nuance in TV production. Morgan is for serious literary analysis when it comes to Wheel of Time. And obviously full spoilers, whereas Wheel takes is not full spoilers, but they're full spoilersness of like production and stuff. Like, but Morgan's on that level where like she pulls it apart and explains it in dimensions you didn't know existed. Yeah, I am so glad we've got her on for that bagging chapter.
Yeah. And that's fun in fantasy as well, because so much of it is like what we just spent like the last 2 hours doing, right? Which is like, what happened? What's your plan? Like a lot of it can be that. And so kind of taking that time to be thinking through it.
Who's this character? What, you know, which of the 3 names?
What do they do later? Like there's so much here that there's just even getting those fundamentals down is like, and you need that before you can really have that literary discussion. So it's awesome that there's space for it.
Right. And we dip into the literary discussion when we can, when it's relevant, but Morgan just lives there. You know, that's she's at this whole other level above or below, depending on.
No, I think you guys do it a lot, but yeah, living there is a different thing. Like having that be the point. Whereas I'm really glad that's not the point of this podcast, or I wouldn't know what this shit was going on in the Wheel of Time. So place for everyone, and you know, there's a room for all different stuff. But yeah, it's cool that she's doing that. I will definitely have to go check more of that out.
Turns out reading comprehension is important and hard.
Both. I'm nodding so much.
Yes, that's correct.
But yeah, Lindsay, again, thank you so much for coming on, and plug your podcast again, because it's been like 2 hours since you got to plug your podcast. So
it has. It's been a whole 2 hours, Rika. But yeah, do please check us out, guys. It's called Behind the Timeline. You can get it wherever you listen to podcasts. And will you guys put our socials and stuff?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Sweet. Yeah, so I'll be in there, but we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we have a website, so you guys can check us out and follow what we're doing. We're going to be coming into the 90s super soon, but we will also have a very in-depth, and we're excited about it, review of the Batman, and that's going to come out like in the early side of, actually probably around the time that this podcast is coming out, probably around the time you're listening to this. You can go check out the Batman review.
Where does he get all those wonderful toys?
I'm so excited for this movie. I have like a whole day planned around it. So yeah, check us out. We're having a great time over there. And we will be back for the Wheel of Time season 2 as well. So if you're looking for someone who's really just doing like a show review episode by episode, I have obviously read all the books multiple times. My co-host has read some of The Eye of the World. He will tell you he's read a little more. I don't know. I'm like, we're not there yet. I can tell. Like we've been to the wiki. So it's kind of a fun dynamic when we do the Wheel of Time, because it is all really brand new to him and he's just seen the show and I know everything that's going on. And so you get kind of a fun mix of viewpoints in our Wheel of Time reviews. So those are all there for you guys to check out too. And there's special Dark Friend social episodes that are just me going for all those evil spoilers for every episode. I was like, I can't. I'm trying to be good. They're kind of like book spoiler free for most of our TV reviews. But if you guys want a book spoilery TV review, go check out the Dark Friend social episodes where I dig into all that stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, this was wonderful.
No, thank you. And thank you for coming back despite my snafu.
But yeah, thank you guys. This was super fun.
Yeah, really appreciate your flexibility with that. I'm so glad we got you back for this. This was really fun.
Yeah.
Got a lot out of it. So
like really wanted to come and do this.
We managed to pull off a 2 chapters in one episode thing. That was definitely a little bit challenging in some respects, because you know how we like to talk. But yeah, 2.5 hours I think is it's good. It's good. This was great.
Unfortunately.
That's mean. Wow. That's real mean.
It's so true though.
They learned. They got better. I got better.
Children are hard to make act.
They improved
though
marginally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they're also not talentless as a demographic. I mean, look at like Stranger Things, you know what I
true.
mean? Like talented children exist. They just were not found in 1998. That's all I'm saying.
I thought people liked the Harry Potter movies.
I regularly rant about this. Yeah, no, I don't. The people might. I don't. I'm sure lots of people out there are pissed right now. I don't care.
I feel like the opinions have really gone down on the Harry Potter series in general over the last, 3 or 4 years for some reason.
Oh, I can't imagine why.
Hashtag trans lives matter.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like, I like the way that fandom has been able to move forward from the author, though. That's cool to watch. I don't know that we have any other, like, examples of this kind of thing happening with something that's as popular as that is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I can get into that a little bit because it bugs me a little bit that we're letting people, like so many other people, when the creators of the content fuck up like that, we dismiss the content and people are like, but I love Harry Potter so much. I'm going to keep it. You know, and to me that there's a little bit of incongruity in that, in people's behavior, and like, just because you love something so much and it means so much to you, you're going to have different standards for that
Doesn't
author.
make it okay to be a TERF.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think it's a super complicated issue that I will not prolong our little sidetrack into.
It's complicated, and everyone has a right to have feelings.
It's very complicated.
And I'll go back to my original opinion of Harry Potter books, which is they were fine individual stories, but there was no real plot that went through the whole thing. She made up magic on the spot whenever it came up for her plot reasons, and you know, I read them when they came out and I liked them, but I was reading Wheel of Time at the same time, literally. Like they were both coming out at the same time, you know? And so like the comparison was people like, I love Harry Potter. I'm like, okay, I'm glad everybody's reading them, but it's not good fantasy.
Right.
Maybe this will be a good gateway for people to get into good fantasy.
I don't disagree. And I love me some Harry Potter. Like I'm obviously like a really aggressive book purist for Harry Potter, but like more so than any other fandom. But yeah, it's weird. I was reading Lord of the Rings at the same time as Harry Potter was coming out, and I was 11 when Harry was 11. Like I was that age group, right, to go through it with him the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm the same age as Harry as well. Yeah, same. Born in 81, you know.
Well, I was born in 87, but when I was 11 when book 1 came out. So not when Harry was 11, because the timeline in Harry Potter takes place prior to the timeline where the books were released.
Exactly. So, yeah. Okay. So there's two ways to be Harry's age, right? You can be his age. Yeah. Yeah. You can either be his age when you can be born the same year as Harry, the character, was born, or you could be 11 when the book came out and he was 11.
Yeah. I was 11 when the book came out. So I did that whole thing. I got the last book in Amsterdam partying after my first year at college, and I demanded an English speaking version or an English written version of that book.
And because the book takes place over 7 years.
Yes, it's 7 years.
And it took her like 10 or 15 years to write them or something like that, right?
It was more than 7.
It wasn't 15. It was because I was 11 when it started, and I was like...
It was like 8.
I think I was 21 the summer that the last one came out. So it was a few extra, but it was...
And there was 2 books to book 7. Book 7, it pulled A Memory of Light and was in 2 volumes. Yeah, my memories of Harry Potter are positive mainly because my dad read them to my brother and I, and he had a really good reading voice, a lot like Patrick's, actually. Patrick's reading voice and my dad's reading voice, very similar. And so my memories are mostly of my dad's voice being the narrator. I can't stand the Harry Potter audiobooks. I absolutely can.
No, I can't either.
And I mean, yeah, it's
terrible British accent.
It's derivative storytelling with a bunch of really unoriginal tropes. And like, it's fine, but like,
oh look, greedy goblins that are basically Jewish analogies who love money. You're like,
yeah, it just on and on and on. So it's like,
yeah, it's not great. There's a lot in that's not great.
The sound of my dad reading it to me is really where the magic of Harry Potter to me. The movies are like, they're fine, I guess. But like, I
never liked them as much as the books, and I never really liked the books that much.
Yeah. And like, I reread the books at one point just for funsies, because sometimes I like to binge through like books I read in my childhood. And it's like, man, this is really just... I have better childhood nostalgia books to read than this. Like Tamora Pierce books and stuff, you know?
Well, especially if you guys had Wheel of Time, like, you know, because that would have been a whole different thing.
Well, Redwall, for fuck's sake, is better.
Well, Redwall, yeah, also better.
Yeah, Redwall didn't catch me because I don't know, it just didn't cross my radar till I was about full up.
I think the magic of Harry Potter for those of us who were that age was the serial nature of it, of being able to have a book that had been aged up to your current age when it came out and be able to grow with it. I know like people my age now who they're trying to get their kids into it, or people older than me, their kids are around, 10 or 11 when they get started. And it's like, cool, but in 6 months, you guys are fucked. Like they get to book 4 and it's like kids are not absorbing what's going on because they're 11 and they're reading the third book, and that's not supposed to be. So I think there was something really special about every summer a new book that was all of a sudden your new reading level, that was your favorite characters, that was, all your, I mean, that was the shit back in the end of the 90s. Let's be real. Like midnight book releases for Harry Potter and going with all your friends and like getting left at the mall. Like, that was cool. Like it was, and I loved it.
And I worked at a pool over the summers. I was lifeguarding all through high school. And so every summer, literally the pool would get flooded with kids sitting there reading the Harry Potter book instead of swimming, and it was the best day when a Harry Potter book came out because the pool was empty. But I'd always borrow one of the kids' books. I'd be like, when you finish that, let me read it, because there's hundreds of copies because everyone went out on day one and bought it. So
my dad pre-ordered because he was smart. I didn't have time to stand in line.
We did that, and my mom very wisely pre-ordered, and we were very lucky to have the means to do this. She pre-ordered 3, and she pre-ordered 1 from the library. So we had 2 first American edition hardcovers every year that she would put away.
Nice.
And she did this for me and my sister from the very beginning. And so my sister and I both have untouched hardcover first edition sets.
Wow.
That one day will be worth something, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's first editions are fucked because they all they got read to absolute death. I mean, I have my reading copies are here and they're destroyed, but we have full sets that were never touched. So she would get 1 that was a reader and 1 from the library that was a reader and 2 that we'd put away. And then my mom and I would book it through the 2 books that we had within like 7 hours. And then my sister would get them. And, whoever finished first, my sister would get it. But yeah, that was very wise of her. I really appreciated that from my mom, that we have these like pristine
awesome.
Full sets put away that are cool. So I love that I have those. Yeah.
I think I remember Harry Potter books. Like I knew someone who would like read slowly. And I'd be like, oh, let me borrow that for a day or 2, and they're like, oh, I'm going on trip and I can't finish the book. I've only read a couple of chapters. I'd be like, oh, let me borrow that. And I'd read it in like a couple hours and hand it back to them, and they'd be like, what are you done? I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
That was how I was when I found Wheel of Time. The boy that was giving them to me was very shocked. He knew how fast I read because we were in a very small class and I read constantly. And that was why he recommended it and started loaning me the books. But he was still like every Monday, I'd be like, okay, next. He's like, really? Like, yes, really? Give the next.
Yeah,
now.
really.
Yes. More, please. I'm like you guys, super fast reader, super prolific reader, but it still took me I think the better part of a year to get through the Wheel of Time. Like being an adult with a job and, things to do in my life, but still pretty much having the audiobook on like as often as I was able to pay it any attention. Yeah, it still took like a year. And damn, was it a fun year though.
What I figured out is a Wheel of Time book is generally about 24 hours of audio content, right? From start to finish. If I'm working an 8-hour shift, I can listen to a Wheel of Time book in 3 days. At my job.
I did this math. I tried to commit to this before the show to do the whole game. Like there was no way.
Yeah. So I mean, it helps if you're working a job. A commute plus an 8-hour of a day job where you can listen to headphones helps.
Well, I can, and that's how I did the math. But it was too much of like. It was too much. I couldn't commit to doing that for the full like month or whatever that it takes, where you have to put in like 8 hours a day to listening to the audiobook. It was like too many distractions and too much else going on, and I couldn't follow through. You look like you did, huh? Did you follow through?
Yeah, well, it was just I was working a job where I was working 3 10-hour shifts in a row, and so I just every week I listened to a Wheel of Time book for years. Like that was the thing. It's like it was years. That was why I did. It was just on repeat, not to mention just all the other time I'd listen.
I just at a certain point have to be on the phone, and then I pause it, and then I get distracted. I did that for the first 3 books before the show started, and then I was like, all right, I'm just going to pop back to book 8 because I was like, I have read the first, like I think many of us have read the first 6 books or more times than I've read the back half, right? So I was like, okay, this was good. I want to get this in before the show, but also like I wanted to do the first 3 seasons because I knew all of that would the first 3 books for the first season because I knew they would all kind of play in, and I figured refresh on that and then pop back. So I'm somewhere finishing this, but also I'm kind of like where we are right now to take us back is kind of where I am on my reread a little bit. I keep getting ahead of you guys and then kind of like spacing it and kind of like what happened. And then I'm like, my current reread is just with what spoilers.
I can't wait to reread all these chapters once we finish the series and go back and be like, oh, I know even on the original 6, like listening to my girlfriend is listening to them and she's on book 4, and like, man, I've analyzed every word of these books. And as we go back through them, I'm like, wow, I know what every sentence means as just listening to the audiobooks. And so I'm really excited to do that for books like 7 through 12.
Oh man, that's going to be just a world of difference on our perspective.
Mm-hmm. I'm so excited for all of the go forward, like just getting into the slog, but into like book 11, like getting through the next 2 books and into where things get really crazy and the ones that I've read less times I'm excited about.
Yeah. So, but in order to get there, we do have to finish this chapter.
What? No.
Right. So back to the Wheel of Time.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?